on the road. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council regular meeting for January 9th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask everybody in the room to please mute your cell phones or other electronic devices. I'll ask Rob to do a roll call for attendance.
Thank you. Trustee Apatow. Here. Trustee Orsic. Here. Trustee Handler. Here. Trustee Dearborn. Here. Trustee Albinson. Here. President Rentz.
Present.
Trustee Dahlman is absent tonight.
Okay. Item 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. I've asked Trustee Dearborn to lead us this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item 3 is quorum check. Rob, you want to run through the upcoming meetings?
Yes. The two remaining meetings for January are the 16th and the 23rd. Trustee Dearborn, I have you out for the 16th.
Correct.
Everyone else okay for January? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oh. Public comment. So we're, in the new year, we're moving to a new protocol for village council because those of you who have been here before know how difficult it is for me to figure out which role we are in as we call people up for public comment. So we now have a sign-up desk that'll be outside as you come up the stairs. And if you wish to make a public comment tonight, you need to have signed in on the sign-in sheet. We have 2 sign-in sheets. One is for the public comment, which we're having right now. And then there's another one out there for later in the evening when we have the public hearing. Thank you. So make sure if you intend to talk on the public hearing that you get out into the hallway and get your name on the list. All right, so this is the time of the evening where anybody in the room can come on up to the podium and share your thoughts with Village Council on anything that is not on the agenda.
Looks like you have a sign.
Oh, yeah, I've got 2 already, but I just want to make sure. So this is for people that are not on the agenda. I have 2 people signed up. The first one is Robert Griffin. Come on up, and you can share your thoughts. Oh, you have to come to the microphone, though. It makes for better TV.
I just have a really quick question. With regard to the Bluff stuff, and there's I'm not going to mention his name, I don't want to get sued, but there's a big house being built there. I lived on Sheridan Road. I live on the west part of Sheridan near Cherry, about 5 blocks away from Centennial Park. Over the last 7 days, major construction on our parkways, holes being dug all the way down. Some are being dug in property that's not the parkway, it's people's lawns. And so I went up to a guy and walking my dog, and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "It's for fiber optic cable." I said, "Really? You're going to replace all these wires?" "No, for one guy, the guy that built in the big house." I just want to know, is he paying for it?
I don't know because the fiber optic is provided by AT&T, and the village has its own issues with AT&T as well. So I'm sure that if there's any good news out of this, that maybe everybody in the line will be able to tap in if that's something that they
Well, I
desire
know
to
the
do.
way the guy explained it to me was the lead guy. He said, "No, this is just for him."
Wow.
Yeah,
You have anything to
and
say?
he knew his name too.
Okay.
No, AT&T and other utilities have the right to access the public right-of-way for utilities.
That's
And they
okay,
have to
yeah.
have a permit for that, but the village doesn't pay for that.
Okay, I'm just wondering, why he's getting this and we're not.
We're experiencing a lot of new things as a result of the development over there, that's for sure.
Okay, very good. Thank
As
you.
you'll see later this evening. Okay, Ted Winnichenko, you're number 2.
Hi, Ted Winnichenko. So I wanted to pick up from where we left off the last time I was here. So the Bertling sidewalk, right? I have pointed out that these closed session meetings, probably were inappropriate. And I said, you know, if the village wants to meet in secret, I don't think that's right. And after I left, President Rins said that the village does not meet in secret. Well, I believe that's demonstrably false. There's emails from village staff prior to the first open meeting on the vacation of the sidewalk that says, and it says something to the effect of, quote, as you know, this was to the owners of the properties, as you know, village council has decided to approve vacating the sidewalk for you. So that quote from village staff before any public meeting on the vacation of that sidewalk is demonstrably shows that there was a meeting, a secret meeting. Call it what you will, but the village met in closed session, discussed items outside the purview of that closed session, and now continues to keep those session meetings, session minutes private. Although the OMA requires that the village review requires that the village review closed session to determine whether those minutes and information should continue to be kept secret or not. Clearly, the sidewalk has been sold. What point is there in keeping the discussions of how much to charge for it secret at this point? I can think of none unless there were other secret things discussed at that meeting. Now, I have about 12 days or 15 days left to decide whether I should pursue this in county division of the court. You know, I've started writing a complaint. It's just exhausting to try to do everything. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I think the village should definitely release those minutes. There's no reason to keep them secret unless you want to keep the meeting secret. And it was a secret meeting.
Thanks, Ted. Since we're on a new system, I'll ask just tonight, is there anybody else who would like to join in on the public comment on non-agenda related items at this time? Okay. Seeing none, I will close the public comment and we'll move forward with the meeting. Okay, next item is reports. Trustees, Kirk, we'll start with you.
No report.
Bob?
Of the Environmental Forestry Commission, Forestry Commission and the Friends of the Green Bay Trail will be discussing some of the concepts they have for the trail work, potential trail work.
Oh, great.
So, tomorrow night.
Sounds good. Kim?
No report.
Bridget?
No report.
Rob?
Yeah, quick report. In my role as liaison to the chamber, I always like when there's good news to kind of report. We've been talking about the vibrancy of Winnetka and how it's really stepping up. And one of the ways you can measure that is the vacancy report. We've all, those of us who have lived here for 2 or 3 decades have looked at this and seen a lot of open storefronts. The vacancy rate has dropped now by over 2% to just from 5.32% in Q3 to 3.20 in Q4. That is the lowest vacancy rate since 2017 when we started tracking those rates. And I would say it's a lot lower than I've seen in 30 years. So I think that just shows to how vibrant this community is, what's happening here, and it's really catching steam. West Elm now has a 0% vacancy rate. Compass Realty moved into a vacant 10,000 square foot Caldwell Banker space. Tala Coffee opened up. And this is a heck of a bounce back since the pandemic. So since 2020, what's interesting is 34 businesses have closed in Winnetka, relocation, retirement expansion plans, or closed permanently. But 82 businesses have opened or expanded in Winnetka. 53 businesses are new. 17 businesses expanded to larger spaces. So it just kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. You obviously, everybody knows about the restaurants, but the rest of retail is kicking in, and not just Winnetka, but Hubbard Woods and Indian Hill. I think that bodes well for the whole village. So it's good, great news. And Liz DeChance done a great job of really spearheading that. So.
Liz has done an amazing job, and we should really be grateful that we were able to bring her on staff. She's done a wonderful, wonderful job.
Absolutely.
And really
Tireless. Yep.
busts her. She works really hard. So thanks, Rob. Village attorney. Village manager
No report this evening.
and village president. No report. So we'll move forward with the establishment of the consent agenda. Does any trustee wish to remove an item on the consent agenda for a separate vote? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the final form of the consent agenda?
Second.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move forward with the approval of the consent agenda. I will ask the village clerk to read the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Approval of the Village Council minutes for December 5th, 2023 regular meeting and December 19th, 2023 regular meeting. Approval of the warrant list dated December 15th, 2023 through December 28th, 2023 in the amount of $969,682.45. Ordinance number MC 13, 2023, amending the text of the Winnetka zoning ordinance regarding residential uses in the C2 General Retail Commercial Zoning District for adoption. Ordinance number M21, 2023, granting special use permits, a variation from the Winnetka zoning ordinance, and a certificate of appropriateness for the construction of a new multifamily residential building within the C2 General Retail Commercial Zoning District for adoption. Resolution number R1, 2024, awarding a contract to Christie Weber Landscapes for the Commercial District Floral Program for 2024 through 2026. And resolution number R2, 2024, waiving competitive bidding and approving a contract with Great Lakes Urban Forestry Management for forestry professional services in 2024. Resolution number R1, 2024, awarding a contract, did it twice, so just once.
They get two contracts?
Yeah, just one contract, sorry.
Okay.
And that's it for the consent agenda.
Great, thanks. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda by omnibus vote?
So moved.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Alvinson?
Yes.
Trustee Orsic?
Yes.
Trustee Handler?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
That motion carries. Thank you. Just so everybody in the audience knows, if anybody showed up for the item related to the pickleball, the private pickleball court on Sheridan Road, that's been deferred to the next meeting, so we won't hear that until the 23rd, right? So the next item on the agenda is ordinance number MC2, 2024, amending Titles 9 and 10 of the Winnetka Village Code regarding unscheduled bus stops. This is up for introduction and possible adoption. With recent increases in the unscheduled and unannounced one-way bus traffic impacting the northern suburbs, council will discuss regulations for one-way intercity buses. And Village Attorney Peter Friedman will review this.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you just indicated, there, as we all know, there has been a dramatic increase in unscheduled, unannounced one-way bus traffic impacting numerous communities throughout northern Illinois and even beyond northern Illinois down south a little bit. In response, several communities have adopted regulations in response to these events. These regulations generally fall into two types of regulations, two types of categories. First, regulations that govern the drop-off of passengers by buses. These regulations typically restrict buses, impose fines on bus owners, operators, and drivers, and provide for possible impoundment of buses that violate the regulations. The second set of regulations are those that govern extended stays, hotels, and other types of businesses that may provide temporary housing to migrants. The ordinance before you tonight is the first type, focusing only on unscheduled drop-offs, unscheduled bus drop-offs. As the staff report indicated, at least 36 Illinois communities have adopted these types of regulations or are in the process of considering them. I know that since the staff report went out, the Village of Lake Bluff last night adopted its, and I know that the Village of Libertyville is considering its regulations, which are similar to the ones that are before you tonight. They are doing so as we speak. The regulations in the proposed ordinance are fairly straightforward. As the President said, the key term is intercity buses. Intercity buses are buses that are providing
one-way transportation of 10 or more passengers originating outside the village and that are not regularly scheduled, are not providing a regularly scheduled service. And a regularly scheduled service is one that is predictable and reoccurring based on some published schedule, providing a service in exchange for a fee, providing the bus service in exchange for a fee, or where an employer is providing bus service to employees for transportation to and from work site. Under the ordinance, unscheduled intercity bus stops are prohibited. And unscheduled basically means that they are happening without prior approval because the regulations in the ordinance require prior approval before there can be an intercity bus stop. In order for intercity bus to stop in the village, the following requirements must be complied with. The bus stop can only be between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. It can only be within a 30-minute window of when it is scheduled on either side of when it is scheduled, when the approved time is. The bus stop can only be at a designated place, and the Indian Hill Metro Station parking lot is specifically designated, although if necessary, the village manager can approve an alternative spot. There must be some coordination provided for the disembarkment of the passengers. And there needs to be, as I said, advanced approval upon application to the village manager. And that, the application for that approval has to be provided 5 days in advance of the scheduled arrival. The details on the proposed bus drop-off, the bus, owners must provide information on the owners, operators, and drivers of the bus, contracting entity information, in other words, who is the entity or government or private who is contracting for the bus, bus vehicle information, number of passengers, contact information on those who are going to meet the bus, and as I said, some plan for when the passengers disembark. This must be approved by the village manager, and it may be limited to one per day so that the village, so a community is not inundated with more than one per day. Penalties for not complying with the regulations: if there's false information provided in the application, the approval can be revoked. And if the regulations are not complied with, there is a penalty of up to $750 per passenger, plus village costs, and under some circumstances, the bus, the village police department has the ability to impound the bus. The city of Chicago has impounded a couple of buses and has found, I think it's over 60 or 70 bus drop-offs to be out of compliance with the city's regulations, and those fines have been imposed. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that summarizes the ordinance.
Great, thank you, Peter. Any questions from the trustees or on this item?
Peter, just a term, the intercity bus, is that applying, is that a very specific, is that too specific, or is it any bus type, or is that just a name or category that it's called?
It's specific to the fact that it is it's a
Okay.
bus that provides.
I got that part, okay.
Yeah, that's how it's defined. That's what limits it.
Okay.
Others?
Can we walk through, like, how this actually plays out in reality? And let's say somebody makes an application. It's reviewed by the village manager or somebody appointed by the village manager. Then what?
Right. So we have a draft application ready to go, so we would have to be received timely, right? And would have to be complete, so that would be a big part of our reviews, make sure the application is complete. And then there'd be a scheduled time so that we could allocate resources and plan for resources as opposed to being caught unprepared. And I would say that in talking with other municipalities nearby, a 1 or 2 bus drop-off could take all their public safety resources to ensure that the passengers safely get on trains and move to their next destination. So having pre-notification helps us plan and be able to respond to it.
So this isn't in any means a measure to prevent a scheduled drop-off. It just regulates the process to do a drop-off, correct?
Correct. and it ensures the better treatment, health, safety, and welfare of the passengers as well as the community, and having some structure around it so that we can provide the adequate service.
Yeah, I was looking at the health, safety, and welfare of this community is first and foremost of knowing who is there, and is there a listing of who is there, or just blank passenger? Because if there's no vetting done, how do you don't know who's coming into your community? And that's the concern.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll open this up to public comment. Would anybody from the audience like to comment on this issue? You're welcome to come on up to the microphone and share your thoughts with us. Seeing none, we'll close that, bring it back up. Any conversation or further deliberation? Okay. Let me get on my page here. First question, is this something we would like to waive introduction of and move directly to adoption? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Got five in agreement, so let me ask this then. Do I have a motion to waive introduction of ordinance number MC 2, 2024?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries, and now may I have a motion to adopt ordinance number MC 2, 2024?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Handler?
Yes.
Trustee Orsic?
Yes.
Trustee Apitoff?
Yes.
Trustee Albinson?
Yes.
That motion carries, thank you. Okay, my item B was the pickleball court at 880 Sheridan, that's been deferred. And then we'll move into ordinance number MC 1, 2024, amending the Winnetka zoning ordinance to establish bluff regulations for development in the steep slope area along Lake Michigan. This is a public hearing and it's open and it's up for introduction. A public hearing on the ordinance has been advertised for tonight's meeting. Council will consider amending the Winnetka zoning ordinance regarding the establishment of bluff regulations for development in the steep slope area and the amendment of definitions related to the lot line and front yard setback. The public hearing on the Lakefront Preservation Overlay District is now open, and Village Attorney Peter Friedman will review the guidelines for tonight's public hearing.
Thank you. As the President indicated, the public hearing has been opened. The Village President has asked me to review the rules for the public hearing. I will say that ordinarily, a public hearing like this is conducted by either the ZBA or the Plan Commission. However, because this is a text amendment, it is the council's purview to hold the public hearing here. And so we wanted to provide specific rules for this public hearing as opposed to the public hearings that are handled by the lower bodies. The village president will shortly administer an oath to all persons intending to testify during the course of the hearing. After that, the Director of Community Development will have a presentation on the proposed ordinance and related historical background information. Then there'll be an opportunity for the council to ask questions of the Community Development Director with regard to that presentation or any other village staff with regard to the proposed ordinance. And then we'll move into public testimony on the proposed ordinance. Members of the public who are present will have the right to address the council with their questions, testimony, evidence, and comments about the proposed ordinance in accordance with the following rules. As I said at the start of the public testimony, the President will administer an oath to everybody who's going to speak. There is a sign-up sheet. It has been filled on the first page. So anybody who wants to testify or speak on the ordinance who has not signed up, Kristen is providing an additional sign-up sheet. So if you could sign that, that will be provided to the village president, and he'll go through that list so we can do it in an orderly fashion. Each speaker must state their name and city or village of residence in a clear manner so it can be recorded in the minutes. Unless the village president determines another time limit is appropriate, each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. That's consistent with village practice and custom and other rules. The village president may enforce this speaker time limit. If a speaker is representing or speaking on behalf of a group or an association, we'd ask that the speaker at least state the nature of that representation. At the discretion of the village president, the speaker may be granted more than 3 minutes to speak. It is anticipated that an attorney who has contacted the village is representing multiple property owners will be provided approximately 15 minutes for their presentation, which is less than if each of the property owners who that attorney is representing spoke for 3 minutes each. In the interest of promoting the efficient conduct of public business, the speaker should refrain from repeating their own testimony and comments or the testimony and comments of other speakers. The village president will allow each individual to speak only once unless there's some reason to allow additional comment from the same person. Obviously, we'd ask that the rules provide that everybody be courteous, no clapping, no interruptions, let everybody speak, and so we can have an open and fair public hearing. All questions or statements from the public must be directed to the village president and the council members. The president will determine the manner in which those responses to the questions from the public will be handled. In general, following the conclusion of all the public participation, the village president will direct specific questions from the public to village staff for response as applicable. After the general public comment and testimony, there is the ability under Illinois law for cross-examination. I'm not sure we'll need that tonight, but it's there if we need to. The village president will have the right to enforce these rules and interrupt a speaker. We don't anticipate that happening. Following all the public testimony and comment, the public hearing will be closed, and the council will discuss the proposed ordinance and any material presented. After that, no further public testimony or comment will be presented without the council or the village president deciding that it should be allowed. And we'd ask that during the discussion of the council at that point that members of the public let that happen uninterrupted so there can be a good debate and discussion among the council members. After all of that is over, the council will determine what action it wants to take. Generally, the council, upon motion, can introduce the ordinance, can defer the introduction of the ordinance to another meeting, or can request changes to the proposed ordinance in conjunction with either an introduction or a deferral. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the village president.
I feel like I'm going to be busy tonight. Okay, so.
That's your list.
Oh. If you folks could see my desk, you'd understand why there's these long pauses in forward moving. So hold on here. Oh, so now we're to the public, to the oath. Do they stand up?
They don't have to stand up.
Okay. Anybody who is intending on testifying or commenting on this issue, I ask that you now raise your right hand. Okay. And do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give tonight is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Very good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start off with David. Our Community Development Director, David Schoen, will kick things off tonight and provide his presentation.
Good evening, President Rintz and trustees. This evening, I will be presenting the overview on behalf of the village and our consultant. In addition to myself, Jim Bernal, the village engineer, is here this evening, and also Caleb Barth, our consultant with Baird and Associates, is also here, but here virtually. So with that, I will start my presentation. At your November study session, the Village Council reviewed and discussed 2 draft ordinances. One that amended the zoning and subdivision codes to establish a special use procedure for creating larger lots. The other would establish bluff regulations for development in the steep slope area along Lake Michigan, as well as establish a new demarcation for zoning purposes only for the lot line along the lake. Since the November study session, council has held a public hearing and has adopted amendments regarding the special use procedure for creating larger lots. At the November study session, the council requested staff to make some revisions to the steep slope ordinance and to provide additional information, as well as to set a public hearing on the ordinance. The council requested a more descriptive size for allowed boathouses within the steep slope zone, further information regarding boat ramps and potential impacts on public access along the lake, also further information regarding the use of the United States Army Corps of Engineers administrative benchmark for the ordinary high water mark, and a few other revisions to the ordinance language. Also, since the November study session, council members received questions from the community regarding the impact of the new ordinance on existing structures. I will now briefly review these items. In the staff report, we provided different potential options for limiting the size of boathouses located on the steep slope. The proposed ordinance includes the average size of existing boathouses in Winnetka, as that is the most consistent with the council's direction we received in November, which was to consider a parameter that would accommodate what lake property owners currently have in terms of boathouses while balancing the goal of protecting slopes and their stability. Also at that time, given a majority of the council appeared interest in allowing boat houses to have a rooftop deck, the proposed ordinance would allow a boathouse to be no taller than 15 feet, which would accommodate a boat, and would allow, in addition to that 15 feet, an additional 3 feet of height for a guardrail so that someone could construct a rooftop deck on the boathouse. Given public comments expressing concerns that boat ramps inhibit the public's ability to walk along the water's edge, staff provided information regarding existing federal and state regulations, as well as the recently adopted village regulations that all take into consideration maintaining pedestrian access over and or across a boat ramp at different lake levels. And there's more detail in the staff report regarding that. At the September study session, the council requested that staff explore, for zoning purposes only, a demarcation for the front lot line along Lake Michigan that is more stable than the water's edge, which is what the village currently uses. The council asked staff to look at using the ordinary high water mark benchmark for Lake Michigan as administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is currently set at the elevation of 581.5. At the November study session, staff presented information regarding the use of this measurement for using the ordinary high water mark as the front line for zoning purposes. Again, the purpose of moving to a static measure was to provide property owners with more predictability in terms of the size and location of allowed improvements on their property. During the November study session, some council members requested that staff further study whether the village should use this benchmark as the lot line along Lake Michigan. In the staff report, we presented 4 potential options for the lot line along the lake, which are listed here and discussed in more detail in the staff report. Given a majority of the council members at the November study session voiced an interest in using the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Administrative Ordinary High Water benchmark of 581.5 to demarcate the front lot line for zoning purposes, the draft continues to include that demarcation. The village council also at that study session requested that staff address the potential regulation gap in those instances where the minimum required front yard setback of 50 feet would fall to the east of where the steep slope begins on some properties. The whoops. The ordinance now states that the required front yard setback is the toe of the bluff or 50 feet from the lot line, whichever results farthest from the ordinary high water mark. Next, I would like to briefly talk about existing structures that would be located within the steep slope zone included in the proposed ordinance, but which would not be allowed, these improvements would not be allowed in the steep slope zone under the ordinance. When a village adopts new zoning regulations, the long-term goal, generally over decades, is that properties subject to those regulations will comply to those new regulations. In the meantime, non-conforming structures are generally allowed to remain and be maintained subject to limitations. Under the proposed ordinance, the village has made an exception. Even if the cost of repair or restoration of a non-conforming structure would exceed, I think, just a second, I skipped a page. So, under the village's current zoning regulations, we have non-conforming use section. And it states that pre-existing structures that become non-conforming may remain and continue to be maintained and used so long as certain triggering events do not occur. One of those triggering events is if the structure is destroyed or damaged so that the repair or restoration would exceed 50% of the cost of construction of such structure. In that instance, the structure cannot be repaired or reconstructed. That's for any property structure in the community that has become non-conforming due to a change in a zoning regulation. Also, a non-conforming structure cannot be enlarged or added to that would create an additional nonconformity or increase the extent or degree of an existing nonconformity. Now, as I had started to say, under the proposed ordinance, the village has made an exception, even if the cost of repair or restoration of a non-conforming structure would exceed the 50% of the cost of construction of such structure. A property owner may rebuild the structure within the steep slope zone on the exact foundation of a previously existing structure, provided the structure does not extend beyond the existing foundation and the foundation will support what is rebuilt without material adverse impact on the steep slope zone. The proposed ordinance before you this evening does not contain any changes regarding this issue since the November study session. The village council could choose to make rules related to existing structures that will become legal non-conforming structures. You can make those more or less restrictive if you choose. Now I would like to briefly summarize components of the proposed steep slope regulations. The council had previously directed staff to develop bluff steep slope regulations that incorporated elements from the Village of Glencoe's steep slope regulations and which were presented at your November study session. The council expressed an interest with the Glencoe approach as the zones for each lot are based upon the specific aspects of the slope on a lot rather than a set measurement as most other communities on the North Shore use. Given the varying heights and steepness of slopes in Winnetka, the council found the Glencoe approach the most appropriate for our community. The draft ordinance includes key slope definitions which are illustrated in this image. The draft ordinance only allows certain structures within the steep slope zone, noted in red. However, it allows any structure within the steep slope transition area, noted in magenta, subject to certain conditions and standards. The slope impact area, by definition, includes both the slope transition area and the steep slope zone. As was presented at the September and November study sessions, as the height of the bluff and the steepness of the slope vary, the steep slope zone and slope transition areas will vary. This image contains a bluff on the left that is 30 feet tall and a bluff on the right that is 70 feet tall. However, the actual slope of both bluffs is the same. For bluffs with the same slope steepness, but the height of one bluff is taller than the other, the steep slope zone, the red area, extends a little farther back on the tableland. You can't see my mouse. Oh, there it is. On the tableland than it does on the bluff not as tall as shown here on the left side. The slope transition area, which is the magenta area, also extends farther back on the tableland for the taller slope, again, the one on the right, than it does on the bluff not as tall, the one on the left. This image contains bluffs that have the same height. However, the bluff on the left has a slope of 27 degrees, while the bluff on the right has a slope that is 33.8 degrees. For bluffs of the same height, but have different slopes, the steep slope zone, the red area, extends farther back on the tableland of the bluff with the steeper slope, the one on the right, than it does on the bluff with a slope not as steep, the one on the left. The slope transition areas, the magenta areas, are the same depth no matter the slope steepness. However, the slope transition area on the steeper slope, again, that's the steeper slope is on the right, extends farther back on the tableland due to the increase in the depth of the steep slope zone. Again, the reason behind these observations is that as the slope gets taller and steeper, the bluff slope becomes less stable, and thus the area of the steep slope zone and the overall impact area becomes larger. One additional factor in determining a bluff is that it may be made up of compound slopes. That is, rather than one steady slope, a simple slope, a compound slope is composed of one or more distinguishable slopes with different grades. As illustrated in this image, this compound slope has a gentler slope that is greater than the 10-to-1, and then it has a steeper slope much greater than the 10% slope. The steep slope zone includes both the gentler slope area and the steeper slope area. This slide provides a summary of development that would be permitted in the steep slope zone subject to meeting standards of the ordinance. It includes a limited size of deck, but you can exceed that if you demonstrate exceptional engineering. It allows retaining walls, stairs and steps with limitations, mechanical or electrical lifts or walkways. It allows fences, and as I previously mentioned, allows the rebuilding or remodeling of structures on an existing foundation. This slide continues to summarize the development that would be allowed under the proposed ordinance, boathouses, and it has a limitation on the cantilevering of structures over the steep slope zone. This also highlights that any development authorized under the codes and the regulations of the village and meeting certain standards of the proposed ordinance would be allowed in that slope transition area. The draft ordinance includes development standards for the slope impact area, which includes both the steep slope zone and the slope transition area. The draft ordinance identifies materials that would need to be submitted as part of any permit requesting approval to construct within the slope impact area. The ordinance also includes general standards for steep slope stabilization in the slope impact area. The proposed ordinance also sets out an appeal process and identifies that a property owner can seek zoning variations, which includes the steep slope regulations. As well, when a special use is required, council may grant exceptions to the steep slope ordinance as part of that special use process. So that is a summary of the proposed ordinance, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for David?
Thank you, David, excellent.
Kirk, did you have anything? Okay. Anybody over here? No? All right, we'll move on to the next item. Hold on here. This. I want to make sure I'm on the right spot here, though. Okay. I will now call out those who have signed up to speak and provide comments on the proposed ordinance. After I'm through with the list, I will ask if there's anybody else who wishes to speak who is not signed up, but you don't get a second bite at the apple. As those of you who have been at the meetings before here know, I always have a really difficult time asking my neighbors and village residents to stop talking after 3 minutes. But given the size of the group this evening and the fact that we also have some professional presenters, I'm going to really ask everybody to try to adhere to the 3-minute time limit. Just understand that it's a rule. It's something we have to deal with here. I want to hear everything everybody has to say, but at the same time, I think we owe it to everybody in the room and to Village Council to be concise and focused in your comments. So if you could help us with that, it'll help us get through this portion of the meeting a little bit more efficiently. So with that said, I'll go ahead, and the first person who signed here is Mike Bonds. Yeah, please.
I'm Mike Bonds. I'm a property owner, 139 Sheridan on the lakefront. First of all, I'd like to thank all you guys. I know you guys are volunteers, and this isn't a paid position, and this is probably taking a lot more of your time than you ever dreamed it would. And so I'll be very clear. As I understand it, and again, I'm not all that bright, but as I understand it, there's now a rule that could impact my ability to what I can do in my backyard, and I can't figure that out by myself. I'm going to have to hire someone to come tell me what the slope is. And so my only request is that you give us enough time to go hire the people so I can understand what the impact is on my property. Sure. That's it.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, the second speaker is John Shabika.
Hello, John Shabika, Shabika & Associates, and I was asked to come real quick tonight to talk about the fact that the termination or definition of natural bluff as it relates to Winnetka. And I'm sorry that the overhead's not working because there's cute pictures. There is no natural bluff in Winnetka, and I know the city council, I've given you copies of this. If you look on the first upper illustration, if you've ever been to Michigan, you know what a Michigan bluff looks like. It's an eroding bluff, and that beach fluctuates whether or not the lake levels are high or low. We don't have those situations in Winnetka. The Winnetka shoreline, in some instances, was started to be engineered over 120 years ago. With bluff improvements in the past 30 years, at the recommendation of the village, requiring native vegetation, native restoration as part of an issued building plan, which is one of the reasons why today so many of the lakefront bluffs appear natural, is that was originally a building requirement by the village. And then the majority of the Winnetka shoreline, south of Tower Road, typically wouldn't have stable bluffs or access along the shoreline without bluff restoration or shore protection measures that are already in place. That first picture on that second page, which I absolutely love because it's from the Winnetka Historical Society, it's looking south from Tower Road. And that picture is when only 10 families owned the entire lakefront. I think we should go back and get mad at them for doing a lot of subdivisions, but that's another thing. I did enjoy the fact that the majority of those were pig farms at the time. But what this picture illustrates is the last time the bluffs were what we would define as natural, where you can kind of see that eroding line along the top of the bluff, and you can see then all of the shore protection structures that were put in place back then to help the bluffs become more stable. Even back to the 80s, I don't know if any of you were residents here, you can remember during high lake level cycles, there wasn't a lot of ability to walk up and down the shoreline like there is today because of some of the structures that have been built. And really, the purpose of your ordinance says that bluffs are inherently fragile and subject to erosion. Trust me, lakefront homeowners know that. They have historically chosen to address stabilization, hired the right engineers, do the right landscaping plans and everything like that to maintain those natural characteristics. And those stabilization measures have been completed in ways reducing bluff erosion, reducing hazards to Lake Michigan, and improving water quality. So, and again, proper engineering and construction helps ensure the sustainable natural environment and a stable bluff. The Winnetka Historical Society also provided me with that great picture of the beach house down at Maple Street from 1910, where everybody defines the Maple Street as one of the prettiest natural parks. It's an engineered bluff, and there's a picture of it from 1910. So if there's any questions or anything like that, let me know. I know I'm under my 3 minutes, and take care.
Oh, you actually went 15 seconds over, sorry. Good try, though. All right. Thanks, John. Hal Frank is next.
Don't start that clock yet. Thank you.
Can you state your position in this whole conversation?
I intend to. Thank you,
thank you.
President Rintz and members of the council. My name is Hal Frank. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Meltzer, Pertil, and Stell. I've appeared before you before on this matter at a couple of your study sessions. I passed out to you, my intent here, first of all, let me say this. My intent is to speak for a little bit longer than 3 minutes. As you know, as I've said before, I represent multiple lakefront property owners who are concerned about the adoption of these regulations. I think in the past I've indicated I represent 8 different property owners. That is now up to 10. And I've passed out to you. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you a little bit longer. I am going to try to stay within the 15-minute limit that was referred to earlier. And the only people that are going to address you besides myself is Seth Romig, who's an architect that's been engaged by several different property owners. I have passed out to you a short PowerPoint presentation that outlines a couple of points that I want to make, a couple of slides that I'm going to talk to. Then Seth is going to present to you an analysis that he did that's provided to you in a separate handout. He'll walk through that. And then after he is completed, I'm going to just come back and make a few concluding remarks. A lot of what I intend to talk about has already been provided to you in a letter that I sent you on Friday. I have passed out an additional copy of that letter, hard copy of that letter. I just want to begin following up on what John Shabika said, that the first point that I made in that letter is that the whole premise of your ordinance seems to be to protect natural features, and we think the record is clear that the bluffs that you're seeking to protect are not natural, and that there are other regulations already in place that make the adoption of what you're considering to adopt this evening is unnecessary and potentially making the ordinance subject to challenge. If you could turn to the second page of what I've handed out, the PowerPoint, it does make very clear the extent of the ownership the people that I represent. It stretches all the way from the north up at 94 Mary Street down to 301 Sheridan Road, which there was a mistake in the opening paragraph of my letter. That's the extent of my representation. The reason I want to show you this is because it's all three. I represent people that are in all three of the zones that you've heard about from David Schoen and others. We've also engaged, my clients have engaged an engineer, which you see on the next page. There was talk at your study sessions by your staff about the use of the 2017 GIS information for determining contours, topography, and this is one sample. Our engineer has prepared this for every single property. I'm just giving you one sample, given the limitations of time. On the left is aerial photo of 657 Sheridan in 2017, which locates the 2017 GIS contour lines. On the right hand is a picture following construction of a new home on 657, and you can see there that the contours have changed significantly because of the construction of additional improvements. So following up on one of the things that we've said to you, consistent with what you heard from Mr. Bonds, is it? The first speaker, a number of our clients are eager to get current topographic information so that they can analyze and determine the impact of these regulations on them individually. So they would also like more time to do that, and it's very difficult to get surveyors, number one, to perform that kind of work in less than 3 or 4 weeks, and number two, to get it done at this time of year on the bluff, especially if there is snow on the ground. The only other point that I'd like to make, and again, I have made this in the letter that I sent to you, I support, and my clients all support your concept of trying to have not a forever varying front line with the water's edge. Everybody gets that. I think everybody supports that. We still don't feel that what you're trying to do is accomplishing that goal. Even the revised language seems to say, and as David presented, it could change in the future, so we don't understand that. But more significantly, my engineers, the engineering consultants that I've engaged, have reviewed all the materials, and they say you're mixing apples and oranges, because the villages uses the NAVD 88 datum, the county uses, and I put this in my letter, in your forms you ask surveyors and property owners to come in and analyze topography and site buildings and all that using the NAVD 88 datum, and by referencing the ILG datum, you're mixing apples and oranges. This is something, again, if we had a little bit more time, I would like to have our engineers talk to the village engineer. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Seth Romig.
Hi, everybody. I'm Seth Romig. I'm a licensed architect with over 20 years' experience working in the Chicago area. I work for my self-named architecture firm, maybe not as creative as I could have been with the name, but there it is. Prior to that, I come to this issue with a little bit of unique experience. I have undergraduate degrees in civil engineering with geotechnical background, as well as water resources, as well as structural engineering prior to my architecture training. I'm here on behalf of several owners who contacted me to assess the effects of the proposed ordinance on their particular properties, and they've graciously agreed to share this data with the board, which I've distributed to you in that 20-page document that will serve as some case study examples of the actual applications of this proposed ordinance on those lots. I'm going to jump into a 30,000-foot overview of what that says. The first case study location is in the southern part of the Bluffs at 391 Sheridan Road. This is a property that's in pre-design, preliminary design for future development for a single-family home. We found that on this lot, it resulted in a almost 10,000 square foot decrease of the available lot land within the setbacks for an owner to build a home and other amenities. It resulted in a 40% decrease in the lot depth, which is a critical development. As we all know, the land along the lakefront is the most critical, so often these lot depths is a critical dimension for us to develop a home. It increased the distance of any developed properties or any developed assets on the lot by 56 feet, which is a 112% increase. And then a bigger issue is that this proposed ordinance prevents us from excavating for a walkout basement level. As you all know, that the 2.5 stories above grade that the village holds as a height restriction for development of any housing in this R2 district, that third story of the lower level walkout is one that is a lakefront amenity that brings a lot of value to these properties, and it's a lot of fun to design. The second case study property is at 771 Sheridan. This is in that middle tier of the Bluff zone. This is an existing home, and it has some development that the owners were concerned about how close it was to the steep slope zone. And in fact, we discovered that nearly 3,000 square feet of this developed single-family home is within the steep slope area. That would be subject to the rules that David Schoen presented earlier. That in 20, 30 years that would have to be eliminated. Additionally, it results in a 10,000 square foot, 34% decrease in the lot area within the setbacks, and it results in a 35% decrease in lot depth available for that development, and again sets that house and its amenities in the lakeside 151 feet further from the lake than it was previously. The third case study C, is in the northern part of the steep slope zone with the higher slopes and steeper slope angles. This is 1171 White Ridge Hill Road. Again, this property is one that is under consideration for new construction and has an aging structure on it existing. And the homeowners were looking to develop that property into a new single-family home. And this lot has the most dramatic effects. It has a 53% decrease in the land available within the required setbacks. It has a 54% decrease in lot depth and a 325% increase in the distance of any development to the proximity of the waterfront. In addition to that, obviously what we talked about previously with the prevention of the basement walkout levels and any development within that steep slope zone. The last case study is also in the northern part of the lakefront. This is an existing home with significant existing development in that steep slope portion of the bluff. These homeowners are concerned about their ability to maintain those things over time. And the numbers are in this one, 40% decrease in lot area available for development, a 40% decrease in lot depth for development as well, a 300% increase in the distance from any development to the waterfront. And then it jeopardizes a significant amount of development that's already been invested in the assets of this property, including a below-grade portion of the house that is adjacent to a walkout pool and pool terrace. There's a mid-bluff terrace that I believe has a fire pit and things on it. And then there's terraced stabilized landscape elements that trail down this extensive steep bluff. And all of these things are occupied spaces. And as we all know, the occupied spaces of any property are the ones that get maintained. The sort of averages of all of these things come out to some pretty interesting numbers that I think show that the effects on these lakefront properties are a little bit more extreme than I expected, certainly when we come in here. So I'm sure you guys will be able to look through all the diagrams to see what those effects are. But on average, we see a 6% decrease in total lot area by redefining the lake's edge, moving it into the ordinary high water mark. We see a 41% average decrease in the land within the setbacks that the owners will be able to develop. We see another 41% in the developable lot depth in that space, 3.5 times further setback from the water than is currently allowed, and then the prevention of those walkout basements and the amenities that trail down the steep slope. I'm sure I'm over my 3 minutes, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
You're part of HAL's 15, so.
All right.
So sit down. Thanks, Seth. If you could turn now to the next page of the few pages that I handed out to you. At the top of the page, it says suggested revisions to the draft steep slope ordinance. I think that a lot of the concern of the property owners of our clients anyway, could dissipate if you did a couple of things. I proposed in the letter, and this takes into account the comment that I made in the letter was that people that have already invested significant dollars in their bluffs, their steep slopes, their tableland, that they should be grandfathered from any new ordinance that you may seek to decide to adopt. As an alternative, and I'm thinking, I don't know if David could put that slide back up, and I'm not suggesting you do that, but you had a slide that showed, this is what could be done in the slope transition area, and this is what could be done in the steep slope zone. During the September 12th study session, President Rintz, you made a comment about how it's important that the village is respectful of what people have done down there. And I think everybody appreciates that people have invested significant dollars in not just acquiring these properties, but improving them, stabilizing the shoreline, improving the bluff. I think a lot of the concern could go away if you basically eliminated the second section that creates these limitations of what goes in the steep slope, because a lot of the things that Seth just talked about with his last example, and a lot of what other people have built down in that area, and nobody has said that they haven't done it properly, that they haven't done it pursuant to permits. And so if all of that, as opposed to as an option to alternative to grandfathering them, if everything could occur in the slope stabilization area and the steep slope zone, as long as all the studies were done, the consultants were brought in, the village had oversight and permitting, I think a lot of opposition would go away. That's my opinion. So that's one of the suggestions, which is consistent with B, that second paragraph, the limitations on what could happen in the steep slope zone, that should be deleted. This third one is a minor one I'm not going to go into. The fourth one is, I think there's nothing in this provision. Well, there is something in the ordinance that talks about getting variations from this chapter 17.82, but I think it's very limited, and I think that should be broadened. The other thing that I've indicated in my letter to you, the next page, is I don't think that our clients have a major problem, as I said before, with you setting a new front lot line along the lake, but I don't think your ordinance currently allows for all the things that have been constructed and that already exist in that front yard. As you all know, it is a front yard. There's no provision that says those are permitted obstructions. You can correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I don't think any of the things that I've listed here, revetments, breakwaters, decks, pools, garages, boathouses, boathouse decks, boat ramps, I don't think there's anything in your ordinance right now, your zoning ordinance, that says those are authorized, permitted obstructions in the front yard. These are all things that already exist. So I think that needs to be looked at in addition to the adoption of the current ordinance. There's another provision in your ordinance that talks about Zoning Board of Appeals authority. As you know, it specifically calls out where certain regulations the zoning board has the authority to rule on, and in some cases it's recommending to you, and in others it's final decision. That section is not being proposed at this point. It hasn't been proposed to be amended to identify how this fits in to that scheme. So I think that needs to be looked at. There's nothing in your ordinance that, in this, what you're proposing, 1782, says the Zoning Board of Appeals can look at this, but the companion section that lays out the authorities of the ZBA doesn't refer back to this. So I don't think that's a big issue, but it's something that needs to be looked at. So finally, I put forward some simple conclusions. I think that the ordinance should be revised to acknowledge the unique situation that Winnetka sits in. Again, if you go back and look at your own commentary from the September 12th, I think it was, study session, not the November 14th one, there was a lot of discussion from all of you about how you're different. We are different. Winnetka is a different community than some of these other communities that have adopted steep slope ordinances. And I think that the ordinance should be revised to allow lakefront property owners to do what they've historically done correctly at great expense to them. And in other words, it should be framed in the positive, not the negative. It should say, thou shalt be able to do this if you do this, this, and this. I don't think that the ordinance should be introduced tonight. I do think the public hearing should be continued. There are a lot of issues here. There are a lot of people concerned. Owners haven't had time to really discuss this and get good input, detailed input for all the different properties from their consultants. The village took 2 months in between, from July study session to the September study session to the November study session to this night. We have another 2 months. Intervening, of course, is the holidays. There are a lot of people, more than half of my clients are out of town and unable to be here this evening. So I know you've received letters asking you to, not move hastily, to slow things down. You've got time under the abeyance period to get it done right. And respectfully to those of those among you who think that the owners want to get this, the lakefront owners want to get this done and get this behind them, and certainly, trust me, they want it done correctly, not fast. And I really believe that if this process is slowed down, that you can get to the point that you got to, with the lot consolidation ordinance. As you know, when you adopt it, first of all, when you introduced it, there were almost no people in the audience. By the time of adoption, there were no people in the audience. I think you could get to that point with this ordinance too, but you're not there yet tonight, and I would hope that eventually you do. You have closed a lot of gaps. Again, go back and look at the videotapes and what you've been trying to accomplish. It's all started out, I think it was Trustee Kripe who said, we got to close a bunch of gaps. Since then, you've done a lot of things to close those gaps. And maybe this is another ordinance that closes the gap. But that's where it should be framed. I think, to quote you, Councilman Elvinson, you said again at that September 12th meeting, we got to meld the village's long history of respecting private property rights with an eye towards good environmental stewardship. And if we bring those two together, I don't think anybody will object. I think I'm paraphrasing what you said. I think we could get there, and I'm encouraging you to do that. And thank you for letting me go over 15 minutes.
Thank you, Hal. All right. Next up is Jared Smith. Or Smy? I'm sorry. Did I screw that up? Smith. I don't think Jared's here, so we'll move forward to Donna Pugh.
Good evening. I'm Donna Pugh with the law firm of Foley and Lardner on behalf of Bill Jackson and Bill and Kathy Jackson at 771 Sheridan. First of all, I want to echo a lot of the things that Hal said, especially about needing the time and really digging down into a lot of the details. As Seth has said, each person that comes online and studies it, they've been saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this had such an impact on my property. And the 40% that you're hearing, it has been pretty consistent with the 4 properties that we know of where people have looked at it. So one of the things you might want to look at some point is 50 feet really the right number? Maybe there is a different number that's much less of an impact. Maybe 50 feet has been an arbitrary number that was picked. It would be good to look at it because I'm sure you didn't intend to affect adversely, 50% of the property owners on the lake, which is kind of what we're seeing. So we're hoping that you could look at that a little bit more. But at least based on the impact that we've seen of the properties, it seems that the ordinance goes too far and that it has too much of a hardship. And I want to use the example of the Jackson's home. Now, I know we don't have the PowerPoint, but we do have handouts that everyone up here has, and there's plenty of copies. There's some drawings and examples in here that I'd like to reference. So first, B1, I guess I've called it Exhibit A for those of you, the very first exhibit. This is what, oh, excuse me, I think I've got the wrong exhibit. Hopefully you have an exhibit that says survey. I am so sorry. I'm so used to having a PowerPoint to be able to show you. Well, why don't we start with the drawing that you do have? I believe you have something that says Exhibit A, correct? Okay, so this is what they built. Now, what they started with was a dilapidated house that had an even more dilapidated shed, boathouse, or bluff house, I guess it's called. And then there's a big heritage tree and another big maple tree. And essentially, nobody bought the house for 5 years because of these 2 giant trees and just the way the layout of it was very difficult to make it work. But the Jacksons came along with a creative architect. They found a way to make the house a little more linear and work around the 2 trees. The one is depicted. The other is also very large, the maple right at the bluff. And it wasn't easy working around it. We saw the house tonight, and they did a beautiful job and kept the heritage tree, kept so many of the natural elements. They would not be able to do this if this ordinance were in effect. Seth showed some of those again. Everyone couldn't see it, but about the last third or a quarter of the house would not have been allowed to be built. And a lot of the improvements in the bluff would not be allowed to be built, and relocating the bluff house like they did, and a lot of these things. And what the Jacksons will tell you is if they couldn't have done this, they would have gone elsewhere. They would not have wanted to build just a square box, which is what their alternative would have been. And we've talked to 2 different architects about this. That's pretty much what would be, each person would be faced with is a square box. There would be a lot less options for design. So now, then you might say, well, who cares? I mean, maybe they're not as fancy of house. They moved their house back or something like that. But when we looked one after another at these houses and the impact they were going to have, that taking away, 40% of someone's buildable area, these are huge numbers. And people like Bill saying, I would not have bought this lot. And we know that the property values would be affected. We haven't had time to study. We don't have appraisers yet. We'd love more time to study because we know that the property values would be harmed if this passes as it's written right now. Now, the other thing is, think about the impact on the tax base. Okay, so we need time to study the tax base. And we're asking that you not close the hearing tonight, that you don't introduce it, and I'm going to turn over to George Kissel. Thank you.
Okay, and George is signed up, and he's the next person on the list.
Thank you, Donna. My name is George Kissel. I'm a licensed architect and a certified planner with over 40 years of experience. I was engaged by Mr. Jackson to review the proposed steep slope ordinance from the perspective of a planning and land use perspective. After preliminary review of the materials and studies, I find that there are serious concerns regarding the validity of the proposed ordinance under Illinois law. First, Winnetka's lakefront has been developed utilizing areas in the steep slope zone for both principal residential structures and a broad range of accessory structures. Current zoning allows this type of development by right. This development pattern is well established, and recent construction continues to follow that established pattern. Given the large number of properties, likely more than half that would be made non-conforming by the ordinance, the proposed regulations are inconsistent with the established pattern of zoning and land use in the area that will be affected. Second, Winnetka's lakefront properties are unique, and they derive extraordinary value due to their adjacency to Lake Michigan and the topographic variation that provides the opportunity for spectacular views and equally spectacular architectural expression. The proposed ordinance eliminates the ability to take advantage of those properties' most unique and valuable attributes. The result is a likely significant reduction in value for vacant and underdeveloped properties, and at least some reduction in value for developed properties due to the inability to expand. Along with that reduction in value, there's a likelihood for the future reduction in tax base and revenue for the village. Third, there's a question as to whether any loss in value would be offset by the protection of the public health, safety, or the general welfare. We know that any significant construction in the village has to get a building permit. And we know that Winnetka requires plans to be prepared by either a licensed architect or a structural engineer. It's important to note that the recently enacted Section 15.78 of the Winnetka zoning ordinance, which now governs lakefront development, contains more than adequate provisions to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. Furthermore, historically, Winnetka's lakefront has been safely developed with no incidents of failure or endangerment to the public, even prior to the enactment of the lakefront development provisions. The additional requirements of the proposed ordinance do little, if anything, to further the already adequate protections, raising significant questions as to whether the loss in value to individual property owners is offset by the degree to which the public health, safety, and general welfare is further protected by this ordinance. In conclusion, given that the proposed regulations are inconsistent with the existing and established pattern of zoning and land use, that there's a significant likelihood that individual property owners will experience a loss in value, and that that loss is not offset by any significant public benefit, my opinion is that the proposed ordinance is arbitrary, capricious, and not substantially related to the protection of the public health, safety, or the general welfare. In short, it's not needed. It creates a large number of new non-conforming uses and causes significant harm to lakefront property owners. With that, I'll turn it over to one of those owners, Bill Jackson.
Hey, Chris, thanks. Thanks for the time, and thank you for your time and your service. I understand that this has been a long, hard road, but I'll be quick. As stated, my name is Bill Jackson. We are owners of 771 and 773 Sheridan Road. I just want to make 3 points. They are: the village, from my vantage point, doesn't have the legitimate reason to institute a steep slope ordinance based on the proposed stated section 17.8.2, which is the purpose of the ordinance, and I'll talk about that. Second, there are many unintended consequences that will happen if you induce this ordinance. Third, I believe, and many people have stated this, and I think you've gotten a lot of letters on this, that we're rushing to conclusion, and we should have a lot more discussion and debate around this. First, Winnetka certainly has the authority to issue zoning rules, if and only if these rules are reasonable. Winnetka has not shown that there is a legitimate reason for the steep slope ordinance. There is no public safety issue. We haven't had one in 100 years. There isn't one now, and so why would we think there is going to be one tomorrow? Nor is there environmental issues or natural issues, as John Shabika talked about. So the two main reasons stated, at least from my vantage point, don't make sense. Even in the meetings, the village engineer and the consultants stated that there was no environmental issues on the slope, nor had there been any safety issues in previous statements. Justifying the slope based on Glencoe ordinance, from my vantage point, isn't sufficient either. Circumstances of the property and municipalities are varied. Glencoe was formed by glaciers, we know that. We know Winnetka is formed predominantly by lake bed, at least south of Tower Road. Very different. Their safety, environmental concerns are different. Blanket rules and regulations, such as Glencoe for Winnetka, sounds, at least from my vantage point, arbitrary. The village asserts that landowners cannot rely or expect to rely on current zoning limitations, and that zoning could change over time. However, there are laws or there are requirements, and that the exceptions and there are exceptions and limitations to this rule. There are exceptions set by history, and if it would be reasonable for a landowner to believe that there would be no change, there are limitations to what the zoning changes can be made. Landowners have property rights that just can't be ignored either. Second, extreme restrictions like the ordinance proposed could have adverse effects or unintended consequences. For instance, impairing maintenance on the slopes. Why would we repair something if we're not able to use it? Driving home prices down, we've talked a little bit about that. Reducing lakefront tax base. We don't know that yet. We should know that before we put in ordinances. These unintended consequences, from my vantage point, are real. We would not have bought 771 and 773 if these ordinances were in place. We would not have cleaned up the bluff nor protected the toe of the bluff at major expense if these ordinances were in place. And I'm sure we wouldn't have paid the price that we paid for our land if these ordinances were in place. Finally, we know that this issue has started because of the 205 construction, but we don't believe that justifies these types of rule changes. We believe, or I believe, instituting these expansive rule changes is over-regulation, over-restrictive, and wrong. I think the village does a great job already. I think it's done a spectacular job already. The permits are best and fairest and most efficient regulated if it considers the unique circumstances of each and every property. I've sat here now a number of times and listened to you thoughtfully discuss each and every property, just like the pickleball courts. That's what we need, and we need to continue that process, and thank you for that. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Next is Bill McKenna.
Good evening, Bill McKenna. I also represent Mr. Jackson. Of course, this council has the power to pass the proposed ordinance exactly as it stands and as the staff's has explained it and proposed it. But in doing so, the council also has to do it reasonably and non-arbitrarily, and has got to weigh the public good that you're seeking to accomplish against individual harm. Now, you've heard the presentations from Mr. Frank, his expert, Mr. Jackson, and his professionals and experts, and with very little time, what you've heard is preliminary evidence that shows you've got a significant risk of the devaluation of this lakefront property. And it doesn't appear the council has really studied the value issue. There's no appraisal reports, there's no land planner reports, there's no support. And I think really there needs to be an overall effort to study and quantify value reduction. You've heard also from this evidence that the ordinance does very little to promote the safety or general welfare of the public. Sure, you've got recitals in the ordinance and a purpose statement to the contrary, but even the purpose statement says development could be hazardous to people and property and could accelerate an erosion process. Again, you've heard evidence about a lack of any problems over 100 years, about significant and detailed and new, brand new construction limitations and rules that will address all this. But you balanced against that, there was no evidence before you at all presented by any expert engineer of any sort of imminent erosion or environmental degradation in the absence of this proposed ordinance being passed. And as a council, you really need to weigh the balance here between a potential diminution of property values and what the public is going to gain. The owners here believe that the damage to the value of their property substantially exceeds any benefit. But is the council really even in a position right now to weigh the loss of property value or the benefit to the public, given the absence of any village-sponsored appraisal and the lack of engineering restrictions, support for the need of this development? So that brings us to the village's care in planning this ordinance. I mean, we really applaud you for the study sessions and for all the work you've put into it so far. But there is legitimately a lot more to address and understand. Even the staff pointed out in its report to you tonight that it was, and I quote, difficult to illustrate the potential impact on each lakefront property without individually looking at each property. And that report then went on to note that you could accomplish that within 30 days by working with the GIS mapping consultant. In short, the situation here calls for a clear-headed, systematic weighing based on expert input of the individual harm to all these property owners versus the public good. That's something our client strongly believes has not happened, so we would ask that you take the time to do this correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKenna. Next up is Costa Catulus. No? You're taking a pass, okay. After that, Mr. Griffin. Oh, you get to talk again now, if you want to, on this issue. Okay. I'm not going to argue with you on it. Michael Hara.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Pardon my voice, I've lost it, but I felt it was important. I'd be here no matter what. I have both problems. I own 411 Sheridan Road and 391 Sheridan Road, as well as two properties that are off the lake in front of them. On 411, I was greatly concerned about if something happened to the foundation of part of my house, that you couldn't rebuild it if the foundation cracked. Well, that would destroy my house. I wasn't worried about it at first. The insurance company would write me a check, and then what do? You've taken the best part of the house, which is built into the bluff all the way down to the beach, which I have a walkout basement. I'm about 11 feet off the sand, 11 steps, and you can't rebuild it. So what do I end up with? Part of a house. You know, I get an insurance claim that pays me for that section, and I can't repair the house. So what I've built today, which took me almost 7 years to build, is gone. So no matter what happens with what we do here with these different proposals, I think grandfathering anybody who has something built in the bluff must be done. Anything beyond that is damaging. How do you sell your house when you tell somebody, oh, if something happens to your foundation that's all built in there and it's quite substantial and you're welcome. I tried to invite the entire board out to come and see my house and understand what's there and what I've built. And the structural engineering is beyond anything. It might even be beyond what's being built at 205. But it's solid. We have no erosion. We spent years in structural engineering doing this. So that's one problem. So how do you sell a property when you tell the future owner, by the way, if something happens, you can't fix it, you can't repair it? The other problem I have is I have the 391 property, which for years I've owned it with the intention that I'm going to build a house there at some point in time, probably for my family. My daughter just got married, and she moved next door into one of the other houses. And ultimately, we want to build a house there. Well, you've taken the right to enjoy that property by not having a walkout basement. That's what put you on the beach. We're water people. I've got boats, wave runners. I'm probably one of the few people that's down there all the time, and it's because it's easy to access getting down there. If I've got to walk down 40 steps to get down there, I'm getting too old. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. But the fact that I can go downstairs into my basement and walk out on the beach, I'm down there almost every single day. And that's what I want to be able to do on the other property. If I knew this was coming, I would have built this house 5 years ago. But I never, in my wildest dreams, thought anything like this is coming. And again, I think they've all talked about the fact that there hasn't been one bluff that has failed in Winnetka. And I lived in Highland Park for 25 years, and I lived on the lake. I think I went down there 10 times in 25 years. I was 135 steps from the beach. And by the time I got down there, I didn't want to go back up. So I moved to Winnetka, and I waited to be able to buy a property so I could enjoy the beach, enjoy the water. And I believe this ordinance takes that away from us on our other property. So I hope and pray that you guys will reconsider what we're doing here and not damage the value of what we've all built here and what we've enjoyed for all these years. Because I understand everybody's upset with the 205 property. I understand why. It's overpowering. Everybody sees it from the lake. But as far as digging it out and rebuilding it and doing a beautiful, I'm sure it's going to be gorgeous. I haven't seen the drawings, but I can't imagine with what they're spending in time and effort that it's not going to be beautiful. So with that, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hare. Irene Smith.
Hi. Just okay? All right. My name's Irene Smith, 1087 Elm Street. I've lived in Winnetka now 38 years. I'd like to take my 3 minutes to thank you, the trustees and the staff, for all the work you've done to get us to tonight's bluff ordinance. I represent a large number of Winnetka residents who, while we do not live on the east side of Sheridan Road, consider Lake Michigan and its beaches to be our responsibility as well. We want to protect our greatest asset. You have taken a measured approach, you've studied the issues, and I believe you've done an excellent job. Although the temperature in this room seems to have gone up tonight, please know that there are many citizens of Winnetka who are very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Betsy Gates Alford.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Gates Alford. I'm an attorney with Burke Warren, McKay, and Saratella. I'm here tonight representing the owners of 459 and 465 Sheridan Road. My clients have many of the same concerns that have already been voiced by their neighbors this evening, so I won't repeat that except to say that, like their neighbors, my clients have made substantial investments in their homes and their properties, and they're interested in protecting those investments, of course, and also protecting the value of their property insofar as these ordinances will impact both existing improvements and the potential for future development on the properties. My clients are concerned that improvements that they've made may now fall into steep slope and setback zones that will be restricted, and improvements that they made in compliance with all village ordinances and with village permits will now potentially become legal non-conforming improvements that would then be subject to different types of restrictions and limitations, and that may impact the value of the property going forward. Like their neighbors, my client's main request is just to have additional time to better understand the draft ordinance. To the best of my understanding, the current version of the ordinance that you're considering introducing tonight wasn't made available to the public until last Friday afternoon. Given the technical nature of the ordinance and particularly the way the slope zones are defined, my clients haven't had the opportunity to fully understand how those setbacks and how those slope zones might apply to their properties and to the existing improvements on their properties. And they'd like additional time so that they could consult with a surveyor or an engineer and understand how these regulations would impact the investments that they've made. Both of the properties that my clients own are irregular in shape, and they have greater width near the bluff than they do up close to the street. So they may have a disproportionate impact by the application of those slope setbacks if that cuts into the developable tableland closer to the bluffs. So the main request is just that you not introduce the ordinance tonight, but instead continue the hearing to allow additional time for review and comment on the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Torrey.
Good evening. My name is Andy Torrey, and my firm, Vetter Price, represents lakefront property owners who oppose the proposed steep slope ordinance for many of the reasons already voiced tonight. And I'll try to keep it short because I don't want to reiterate everything that was already discussed. But primarily, Winnetka, as most people know, is one of the last, if not the last, North Shore lakefront village seeking to adopt a steep slope ordinance. Its proposed draft ordinance is based on the Glencoe ordinance, as was also raised earlier today. Glencoe, however, has a markedly different bluff geology than Winnetka. The bluffs north of Tower are considered glacial moraine, while the bluffs south of Tower are considered lake bed with glacial element. The primary purpose of the steep slope ordinance to the north is to preserve views rather than to protect the bluffs. In other words, these ordinances were enacted to keep houses away from the bluff, thereby preserving the view corridors or sightlines of the neighbors. 100% of the bluffs in Winnetka are not natural and have had some sort of engineering to either preserve or improve them. The village did not fully explore any engineering solutions to the perceived issue it hopes to address with the proposed ordinance. No engineering studies were done to determine if the ordinance will actually benefit the bluffs or if the ordinance is even necessary given the existing development regulations. The village should bring in an expert in bluff geology to testify and provide further evidence as to why the steep slope ordinance is unnecessary or whether it would be justified. In addition, the premise for the village's proposed ordinance is to preserve, quote, the natural environment and integrity of the Lake Michigan coastal area. But as previously mentioned, Winnetka's bluffs are not natural, and with proper engineering in conjunction with other existing development regulations, the integrity of such bluffs can be protected without the need for the proposed ordinance. Moreover, the slope ordinance is unnecessary given the fact that the village's existing development regulations already provide the protection that the village has referenced as justifications to push through the ordinance. Given that the bluffs in Winnetka are not natural, what environmental or ecological damage is the village trying to preserve and protect that is not already addressed by existing engineering and development regulations and requirements? What identifiable, quote, hazards that could affect health and safety to persons and property, end quote, exists that the current regulations do not address? How do such development regulations fail to, quote, maintain the stability of the coastal bluffs and shorelines, end quote? Current development and engineering standards and regulations already address these concerns and have done so for years. In addition, how are permitted bluff projects that have been reviewed and already approved by the village engineer, quote, hazardous to people and property, and how do such projects, quote, accelerate the erosion process? Engineering regulations address these concerns and will protect people and property from damages caused by bluff erosion. Lastly, the village should not hastily enact the proposed ordinance because it not only is unnecessary for the reasons I and others have conveyed tonight, but will also have a material adverse effect on property values along the lakefront, as reflected in the letters and public comments contained on attachment 4 to the agenda item executive summary. And it's my understanding there have been subsequent emails received by the village since then. The ordinance is a reactionary response to a project in the village that is similar to other projects in the area that have complied with all existing permit requirements and which the village has previously approved. In summary, there is no need to push through the steep slope ordinance that has not been required in Winnetka in over 100 years. The goals that the village seeks to achieve via the steep slope ordinance can be achieved via the village existing development and engineering regulations without affecting lakefront property values. For Winnetka, this is fundamentally an engineering issue, not a land use issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. Ted Winshenko?
Hi, Ted Winchenko, Winnetka, Illinois. So, I've been listening. It's fascinating. I just keep thinking about Winnetka's motto, progress without change. Yes, Winnetka is different because Winnetka has for years chosen to turn a blind eye to things that people are doing in the name of property owners' rights and property values. And it's disappointing because it's not all property owners' rights and property values that the village considers. It's some owners' rights. I was intrigued to hear, and I'm looking for the sea change in discussions about how it's acknowledged now that the lakeshore in Winnetka has been engineered for 100 years. So I couldn't see the pictures that were referenced earlier, but 100 years ago, the beach in Winnetka was just a thin strip of sand at the edge of the bluff. So we've now I'm glad to hear that the owners along the lakeshore are acknowledging the fact that all the beaches are the result of artificial accretions created by property owners that own that land and are therefore by definition public. And I wait to have that all opened up so that people can camp out wherever they'd like on the beach without any sort of complaints. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Having said that, I think that this ordinance in its entirety is a good thing. I think it's high time that this village move into the 21st century and understand that it's not just property owners and not just individual rights, but that we are a planet, a community of people, and we all have a shared duty and a shared right to enjoy natural benefits. Yes, I think that there could be some things that could be changed. I mean, if there's concerns about how this would impact any particular property, maybe adding some sort of language into the ordinance about a variance process, just like with the zoning code, where if an owner felt particularly aggrieved by the rules, that they could, consider approaching someone and getting more information. But we have to remember that the whole purpose of this, right, is to stabilize and try to prevent further damage to the natural environment. And on the flip side, my concern with the ordinance is that it provides essentially carte blanche to the director to waive any provision of the ordinance in any particular case without any sort of justification. And yeah, the director's discretion can choose to. And I think that's an issue because, I'm not going to talk about Clarence Thomas too much, but we don't know if the director starts getting trips to the Bahamas, maybe they'll make decisions that aren't necessarily in keeping with the public interest. So perhaps having some sort of oversight available to neighbors where they could also challenge a decision. In any case, I think it's a good thing, perhaps a few tweaks, but I think you guys have been talking about this for over a year. It seems improper to suggest that no one's had time to consider how this would affect them and that we need to give more and more time for consideration of the issues.
Thank you, Ted. Ted was the last individual who signed in the sign-in sheet. I just want to make sure that nobody came in later. Come on up, John. 3 minutes.
Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Jenna Radney. I work with App Properties. I'm the leading North Shore realtor. I closed $159 million in 2023. I only say that to show you that I understand value. I'm going to make this quick and sweet. I'm going to go off of 771 Sheridan, the Jackson's property. They purchased it in 2012, 1.3 acres, completely raw, needed re-engineering of bluff, tableland, beach. That was $3.6 million. Going to today's market, I'm going to go to a comp that closed in August, 445 Sheridan, 2.3 acres, land value as well. If I was to have to list 771 Sheridan today, the Jackson's property, I would list it for $7 million as it was in 2012, knowing that I had to actually rebuild the bluff, re-engineer, and do all these excellent things to it. However, if right now Bill owned the house and told me, Jenna, we have to sell it tomorrow because this proposed ordinance is going to go through, I need to get out of Winnetka, what would I list it for? I would list it for $4.5 million, knowing that the land that is there is as good as it's going to get. I can never build anything, I can never re-engineer anything, and you're working with what is on target right there at 771. Thank you for your time.
Okay. 3 minutes, please.
I'll do it in less. So Chris can get home. Susie Schreiber, Winnetka Park District resident, former commissioner, and a commissioner when part of the Centennial Bluff dropped into the lake one Thursday evening in July. So with that background and perhaps a little bit more on the Great Lakes and on Lake Michigan, I think that when we discuss natural or unnatural bluffs, or whether from Sheridan and Maple south, it's lake bed along the lake shore versus glaciers, keep in mind that we didn't have photographers then. You're using an 1897 picture, which I know John has acquired from the Winnetka Historical Society, but there are documented written reports of the vegetation cover along the Illinois shoreline and actually the state of Illinois from 1825 forward of the vegetation, and that was clear-cut by people, the residents, early residents who came in, and yes, they did have pig farms, but just don't assume that that 1897 picture is the natural look of the bluffs. And I would look at the Chicago Botanic Gardens ravine studies and shoreline studies. I would look at Lake Bluff open lands, Lake Forest open lands, and Chicago Wilderness, and all of the extensive studies they have been doing on northeastern Illinois, and put that into the composite from which you're making your decisions. Thanks very much, and continue your good work, and I would agree with everybody, take your time to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Anybody else like to add to the discussion at this? Seeing none, I will, at this point, I will close the public hearing. And I will also go into recess now for 5 minutes. We'll be back in, let's come back at 9 o'clock. Village Council is back in session. And I should have done this before I reopened it. I have to find my guide sheet. There we go. Just so you all know, I'm trying to do this by the book, so I'm being really careful with how we proceed here. Okay, so as Peter outlined earlier in the meeting, step 5 in this evening is council discussion and deliberation. Two things I want to bring up, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to start batting this around. The first one is there seems to be some confusion on the ability of people to work outside of the proposed codes. And there's always an opportunity, and I believe in these ordinances is the opportunity to request a variance, which would be no different than any other zoning variance. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. So, and I see one of our attorneys shaking his head saying no, but what I am doing is stating up here that these ordinances are intended to be supported and enable individual property owners to request variances. I can't point to where it is, but I've been advised by my Director of Community Development and my village attorney that that is the case. Secondly, I want to throw this out to you guys as kind of a conversation starter, or maybe a conversation ender, I don't know. You know, we've had 43 or 44 requests by residents of the community to slow down and not move this forward in an overly rapid manner. Anytime I see a volume, and this is personal, anytime I see a volume of residents expressing an opinion one way or another, you know, it always raises my attention and makes me think about, you know, how we should proceed to address things when we have a group of people that are affected by these ordinances are concerned, and while they're underneath that, they're saying don't do it at all, but at the same time, what we're hearing is there's a lot of things to be discussed yet, and you know, we always agreed that we would take the time to do it right. So I'd like to hear from you guys what you think about how we proceed with the rest of the evening, whether it's time to dig down and deliberate, whether it's time to consider some of the things we've heard tonight and review that in more detail. I mean, I've got a half of a phone book of documents back here from various people in the room, and to be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to look at any of it except as we were flipping through as people were trying to speak. But that's where I'm coming from. So I'd like to just go around and have you guys, you know, share your thoughts on that issue before we start digging into the commas and periods on the various ordinances in front of us. So maybe I'd like to pick it up.
I'll start. So I do have questions for staff regarding the technical merits and just some what-if scenarios on how the ordinance is currently proposed. But as well, I agree, Chris, and I could just informally inform a couple of my colleagues that there's a lot of new information presented here tonight, and out of my own conscience, I would want to better understand all the positions before taking my own position on this. So personally, although I would like to have some discussion tonight because there's some questions I have that would be helpful for the audience and for the council to be able to hear, to be able to talk about it, but I'm not in a position to call a shot tonight, and my personal recommendation would be to defer.
Great. Others?
I do not object to deferring, but I actually don't think there was a ton of new information, and I think that some of the concerns are already addressed in here, like that there are opportunities for variances and appeals, and Jim Bernal actually has quite a bit of discretion to make exceptions. I, in general, don't agree with the property valuation argument. We just had the two biggest sales in Chicagoland, 1 and 2 in all of Chicagoland on the lakefront in the middle of the Bluff moratorium, that people said the moratorium alone is going to drive down prices. 2 biggest sales in all of Chicago. And so I do not agree with the decrease in valuation. I also appreciate the last attorney who pointed out that we are literally the last village to enact this. We're not creating something brand new that should be scary. This has been going on for decades in all of our neighboring villages, and they have not suffered. We've asked them, they have not had lots of complaining citizens. We haven't even really found any. And for the concern that we're not close to Glencoe, ours, I think, is probably the most lenient one from Kenilworth to Lake Bluff. And if you want us to be closer to Kenilworth's, which is, you're saying everything south of Tower should be like Kenilworth's, theirs is more restrictive. So I actually think that with the year that we've been studying this and the versions that we've gone through, we've gotten to a good place. I did get nervous when Mr. Harris said, oh, I wouldn't be able to live in part of my house. But we said at the beginning that you could fix something, even if the foundation broke, and you could build it into the shape of the same foundation, which is what we do with lots of historical buildings. We say build from the foundation. So I do agree, it never hurts. We can take more time. We don't have to do it. But the next thing that will happen is we'll run up against March, which is the end of the moratorium.
people will still need extensions because they haven't gotten their individual data point or whatever, and then it's gonna be like, oh, you're out of time. And I think for me, and for many people, because we got here because of a great number of people that were very concerned about what was happening on the lakefront, it seems this is the right thing to do. All of our neighbors are not wrong in protecting the bluffs as they did decades ago. It seems to be the right thing to do. We want to get it as good as we can. As with anything else, individual homeowners can always come forward and say, will you look at my property? I think I need a variance. And we very frequently work with people and grant variances or get creative. So I don't think it's going to be as concerning as people think it is. And I think most of the people that have already built are going to be sitting on something really nice where they say, oh, you can't build this anymore. Guess what? Mine is super valuable because I'm built into the bluff, and you can't build it. My house that I live in, you walk up the stairs, so we have a really nice layout, and now you can't do that. And we're like, bonus, our house has a little additional value because it has something unusual now. So nobody currently living in their house is looking at losing value. They're looking at becoming something special. So that's how I feel, is it's fine to move it out, and if we have questions about appeals or grandfathering in or whatever the question may be, that's fine, but at some point it should end and we should enact something, and if it needs to be fixed later because we see a big problem arising with our community, then we fix it. So.
Great. Others? Jump in.
Well, I thank you, Bridget, for that. You did that beautifully. I am certainly not in favor of an open delay here. I think if we defer for a period of time, I think we need to state what that time frame is. The staff, we started the whole lakefront process. I think, David, you said it was January 10th of last year. I think that was in the memo. We are 1 year through this lakefront. It has taken enormous amounts of time and effort and time from the residents. We've heard the ordinance that's in front of you was in front of you, 90% of that was there in November. The change was the boathouse, a little other language, but that ordinance is essentially in place. It was not just thrust upon people on Friday. So I think that we have not lurched from where we were. It's been very consistently presented, and here we are. And I actually, one of the concerns I had that Mr. Winnichenko talked about was, I think, actually one of the positives that the residents, lakefront owners, should think about here. And if we talk about the director, I was actually concerned about too much leeway with the director and how we monitor approvals and so on. But it was stated, and I'm on page 12 of the ordinance, development standards. It talks about the development and so on. It says the village recognizes each slope impact area may have different characteristics and features that affect its stability and preservation. Therefore, the director may determine that certain standards do not apply to every application. The director will have the authority to determine if the application in its totality satisfies the purposes of this chapter to a substantial degree without creating an economic hardship as provided. That is intentionally put in there. That's on page 12. Chris, if you just beg with me for a few minutes there.
Go for it.
I'm on page 15 now. We're talking about the impact on adjacent areas. Development which otherwise might be prohibitive here and above may be allowed if such waters are properly drained by a pipe or other approved manner to a municipal storm sewer system, if available, or to the toe of the bluff as determined by the director. All grade changes must comply with the village code. All right, Mr. Director. Page 17, professional engineering. The director can waive requirements for professional engineering. Page 19, additional submittals and waivers. The director may require additional plans as needed for review. He may release an applicant from any element of the aforementioned plan submittals to the extent the director determines that such elements will not materially assist in the evaluation of the proposed blah, blah, blah. Page 21 talks about the arborist. All trees removed in the slope impact area must comply with chapter whatever of the village code unless the village arborist determines otherwise. Okay? The ZBA on page 22. Nothing in this chapter is intended to limit the ability of an owner from seeking a variation. Chris, you wanted to know the page number, page 22, seeking a variation from the otherwise applicable zoning regulations affecting the owner's property. To the extent the regulations of this chapter materially restrict the ability of a property to be developed or materially increase the cost of such development, the ZBA may determine that the effects of this chapter can, in appropriate circumstances, constitute a practical difficulty or unreasonable hardship. And then we go finally to the village council. If a development that this is exceptions, if a development that requires a special use permit includes construction activity that does not comply with the requirements of this chapter, the village council may grant exceptions. So
There's a lot of flexibility.
there's a lot of flexibility, and I would actually propose that there be an addition that if there are exceptions made to a permit that's approved, that the director has to memorialize those somewhere in some way. It doesn't have to be approved by us, but it should be memorialized so that there is a record of why something was accepted and how it remains in compliance with the chapter. So I think from the get-go, and I think anyone in this room that's been with us for the last year knows that we've been very sensitive to saying that we recognize that all properties along the lakefront are not identical. They're unique. We need to think about that. We need to build into the ordinance flexibility, and I think there's a ton of flexibility. And I think a sort of an open-ended deferral here on this is counterproductive. I think it's a good ordinance. I would vote for it tonight. If it's deferred and we learn more, people are more comfortable, fine, but I think it should be limited in scope and time if we're going to defer this.
And we're kind of limited by the abeyance period, right? I mean,
well, we could
that's our
extend-
drop dead date.
That we could do that. And I also would say that I remember that there were people in the audience here that said, hey, you can't do this during the holidays. You know, it's not good. There was an attorney in the room. I'm going to be gone in December. I can't be there for that meeting. Okay, so we didn't do, we could have done this in December. We didn't do it in December. It was loaded. It was ready to go. We waited till after year end, and here we are. And I know people are away, but I agree with Bridget. I do not think this is an onerous, any regulation on any of us is onerous, but I think this has been well thought out. I really admire our staff for the work they put in on this. We've studied ordinances up and down the shore. I think it would work. And so personally, I would go forward with it, but if the group wants to push it out for a little bit for certain specific reasons and a time frame, fine.
What about the, and since you've been going, I'll just ask you about, the one thing that struck me, and I tend to be really sensitive, I think we all are sensitive to the residents, was this, that they didn't have an ability to assess the overall impact of their ordinance until they saw it in its totality. And its totality wasn't distributed until last Thursday or Friday. I can't remember when it went out.
Well, as I said, I think the issue that was in question was not changed from the November draft of the ordinance.
Okay, gotcha.
That's what I was going to say, is November was
I
substantial.
mean, we added the boathouse. We added the language around the boathouse and changed a little bit of wording, but I think the impact on individual properties was there from November on.
Okay. Kim, Rob?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you. You both have made several of the points that I was going to make. Regarding the timing, yes, we've been at this for a year. We've had numerous study sessions, and most importantly, the November draft that we all reviewed, and we were very specific in also what things we wanted to see addressed in this latest version. So the things that are addressed in this final version, or I'm sorry, the version presented tonight, are not new. As Bob mentioned, it was the boathouse, and I'm just confirming the high water mark, et cetera. So all of that was very clear and able to do it. The other thing that nobody's mentioned is whenever we pass zoning ordinances, we haven't gone out and done a lot of customized studies of individual houses to determine what the impact would be on hundreds of, or many homes. I don't think we have in the past. That would certainly, the staff have taken looked at a lot of examples and taken different scenarios into account in a macro sense, and I feel like we've done the work we need to do. I haven't heard a lot tonight that would change that, especially again, given that we've pointed out that we do have the opportunity to look individually at a project when it would come forward and ask for variance. We've also heard a lot here tonight that there hasn't been a problem in 100 years and people have done the right thing, and I know we've reiterated this a couple times that that's right. And I've seen houses where people have done a beautiful job and have done the right thing. One of the reasons we're here tonight is we can't count on that going forward. And this is a forward-looking document, not trying to memorialize what has been done necessarily in the past. I know many people have said this is prompted by the project on Sharon Road now. Well, Highland Park, Lake Bluff, Kenilworth, Glencoe, they all didn't have this project, and we're the last community to put this in place. Obviously, we've been focused on a lot of other things in Winnetka, like stormwater and other things, and perhaps we're catching up a little bit on
Vacancy rates.
on some of the things that might have come before us, or we would have had time to think about had we not had some of those other big projects that have certainly helped the community. But now is the time to move this forward. I don't see a reason to defer it tonight, so I'd be happy to introduce it.
Okay. This is tough. I guess I look at this from the standpoint of, you're right. It was 90% of the way there in November. I think it was early November when we first went through this in the study session. Was it? I'm not sure what the actual date was in November, but it was
November 4th.
14th.
14th. Okay.
And I think all the changes, pretty much, I think almost every change we made was after listening to the lakefront residents and saying, we get it, we don't want to cause you any pain. I would want the same thing on my property as well. And that's how we built in also all the statutes that Bob read to give variance opportunity. I know somebody talked about the one on White Bridge. I mean, if they came in and gave us went through the process and said, here's why we need a variance. This council, I think, has proven, at least in the 3 or 4 or 5 years I've been here, to be very thoughtful to the residents, with a very property rights type of mindset to approve things where there's a real need and it's been proven. So I think those are the things that, making sure there's enough flexibility that you're not locked in. Do I wish this was done 20 years ago instead of people kicking the can down the road? I sure do, because I have a lot of friends on the lake, dear friends that I care about, and have sometimes, we may not agree on everything, but I can assure you that everyone on this council has really taken time and thought into having the lightest touch ordinance from Kenilworth to Lake Bluff that has the most individuality to deal with situations that are germane to Winnetka. But we can't escape the fact that, as they've said, we're the only one that is from Kenilworth to Lake Bluff that has without this. And what happens? People self-select. People come here to do things they want to do that may not be the right thing for the community. Most people won't. Most people have done a beautiful job. The people I know that live in the lakefront, they've done a wonderful job. That's where we were trying to make sure that this ordinance did not penalize them, rewarded them, but let us put in some type of regulation to prevent bad things in the future. It is a forward thinking. They were the last one to do it, but it is forward thinking. So it's very difficult. But I didn't hear much tonight that would, based upon what Bob just wrote and all the variants, all the flexibility we have given, that wouldn't be addressed in that flexibility.
Okay, so it sounds like you guys want to forge ahead.
Could I add a comment?
No. You're outnumbered 4-1, Kirk, so that's it.
I want to.
Our democracy here.
I just want to clarify.
Chris,
my
what are you
comment.
saying outnumbered 4-1 for what?
Well,
To not move it or to introduce
To
it?
move forward.
To introduce it?
Well, just to move forward with the potential of introducing it. I'm not saying we're even at that point yet. However, it sounds like
I don't
everybody.
think, I didn't say
every-
4-1. I said I don't object to pushing back as long as we have an endpoint.
Right.
And I think Bob said something similar.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'm
why
not,
don't you guys-
I think we should
Okay,
talk
well, here,
first.
let me make it easy,
Yeah.
Bridget. Everybody who is comfortable moving this forward and considering an introduction, let's just have a straw poll show of hands.
I mean, I'm comfortable with it.
There's 4.
But
So I was
if-
right,
if-
4-1.
But I also
I'm
respect
listening.
Kirk's
Yeah.
right to read the documents further if he wants to and understand it. So I don't feel, I am comfortable moving forward, but I don't have to because I actually am comfortable also waiting so he can read it and be comfortable.
Yeah.
Point to be taken, we do have introduction and adoption. So there is a 2-week, maybe 3-week period to assimilate all this stuff and get up to speed and re-comment on it when we come back to
Oh, okay.
adoption.
So you can, okay, I
That's
see
why
what
we
you're
have
saying.
a 2-point thing here.
Got
so
it,
we
got it,
can-
got it.
So some of this new information can be, just like we did with the
Oh,
pickleball.
okay. I see.
Where we introduced it, some changes, comes back, and then we can or can't move forward on an adoption.
Okay, thank you. I'm new here.
I know, so there's some wiggle, so there is some wiggle room just in that. Kirk,
Yeah, I wonder,
and
Kirk.
obviously if there is heartburn at that point, there's discussion with staff, there's potential to modify.
Can we have some discussion tonight before?
Sure, definitely.
Okay. And if I could just clarify, my request to defer is not to leave this open indefinitely or to go beyond whatever the expiration of the advance hearing or anything of that sort. It was really out of respect to all the residents, regardless of when the information was shared publicly, we have new information that I feel is thoughtfully prepared. And with me being more of a visual learner and background in design, I'm a real estate developer, I really appreciate the visuals that were put together because it's the first time I've seen something, aside from the hard work that staff has done with the limited information that we had access to, but like true land use impacts based off of the proposed ordinance. And I want to understand what the implication is. And the one that really got me thinking was the White Bridge example. The one in terms of whatever the percentage of loss would be in the use. I'm less interested in understanding the value impact as I am about the use impact of these decisions. And I do have a few comments and questions just that I'd like to clarify with staff or the experts tonight as well. And that's the reason for my recommendation for deferral.
Well, okay, it seems like we're comfortable moving this too. I mean, your colleagues seem comfortable moving it. Doesn't mean we can have plenty of discussion right now. The question was, do we have that discussion now, or do we defer the discussion until we've been afforded ourselves the opportunity to get up to speed on a lot of the documents that we received tonight? I can go either way, guys. I just want to make sure that you all feel that we've had appropriate process, and you all feel that we've had appropriate process.
So if it's, just for everyone's benefit, if it's introduced tonight, what does that mean? We still get to review documentation. Are there potential changes that we could come back and recommend to the ordinance?
Yeah.
It's still an open book, right?
Correct.
We're not locking into a vote and the next time with no discussion.
No, and there have been multiple times since I've been sitting here where that's happened. One, Winnetka, where we basically, at the meeting, at the adoption meeting, or the adoption meeting, there was a lot of changes made there, and it's not unusual. We're usually more buttoned up because we have solid staff and a really good village attorney, so the stuff comes back pretty much the way we expected, but when it doesn't, until we make that final vote on adoption, we can change anything we want.
So just for everyone's benefit, but me as the freshman at the table here, I mean, what is the purpose of an introduction at this point in the process versus having done it 6 months ago or 2 months ago or next time?
That's a Peter thing.
I mean, the code requires that there be, another way is called two readings so that any ordinance, the public knows ordinarily it's going to be 2 meetings to pass. So that's the general rule, and we call first reading introduction. Introduction is a village rule. It is not a state statute rule. It is entirely up to the village. So introduction really has no legal effect outside of the fact that once it is introduced, then it is able to be adopted by the council at a future meeting.
Or voted on, not necessarily.
Or voted on, correct. Correct. And an ordinance that's introduced doesn't have to be adopted, can be deferred. Like, it's an open book what happens to an ordinance that's been introduced. There's no obligation to adopt it or to pick it up whenever.
So to simplify, and I'm not necessarily changing, but now that I have a clearer understanding of the process, I'm not opposed to introducing this tonight. I'm not in a position to actually vote on it tonight and approve it or deny it.
Then I think we're all in agreement.
Then let's talk.
Let's do it, yeah. So-
Does anybody have questions? We'll start out with this so we can, did anything come up in the testimony that we heard tonight that you all would like to drill down in or ask the people who presented questions as far as what their statements were and what the implications of that might be?
The main question that I had was with regard to, I think that I'm clear about the foundation, what I spoke of before. But if somebody already has something built, if they need to repair it, even if the foundation is, if they can, it was sort of stated that someone would lose half their house if the foundation was cracked because they would have to rebuild it or something like that. We basically have a grandfather clause, don't we? That if you need to repair within the same foundation or even rebuild within the same foundation, that's okay?
Correct. You have to be able, the current language says you have to be able to rebuild or repair on the existing foundation.
Okay.
But what about the case of a damaged foundation?
Then they could not replace that structure. The point of that language is the ultimate goal is to remove non-conforming structures from the steep slope.
Oh, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why do we?
So.
Yes, that's with any new ordinance, the ultimate goal is that structure to be removed, right? Even under the standard non-conforming section of the code, that if under the standard non-conforming section, if the repair or replace or restoration costs more than 50% of the cost of the structure, you can't replace it.
And that seems in direct opposition to what we've been trying to do with preservation, because a lot of these things, like right now, we're approving lot subdivisions with setbacks that are inappropriate, but we're allowing it to go forward because we want to keep the old house and allow them to develop the property next door. I never understood that this historic house that we all pat ourselves on the back and feel like we just saved is in peril of ultimately coming down because the objective is to eliminate the grandfathered components.
But you have a process, the variation process, which allows it to continue by you granting a variation of that requirement. So if it is a setback, you are saying on this property, we are granting approval for that structure to remain or to have that setback. So you're granting an approval for that specific nonconformity by granting a variation. That's what a variation basically is. Someone wants to do something that doesn't conform with the zoning code. You're granting them a variation saying that's appropriate. We're going to vary the standard in this situation.
So if in that situation, and I don't want to belabor the point, but in that situation, porch burns down and it's in the setback area, and the fire trucks somebody comes and runs over the foundations and destroys them and they can't be reused. On a historic property that was granted an initial variation to stay where it is. right? Because that's what we're talking about.
Well, it may be that it was, the nonconformity was created by new regulations and became a legal nonconforming structure. And then this happens, David's saying, if you want to allow the rebuild, you can seek a variation to allow the rebuild where the nonconforming structure regulations would otherwise say you have to rebuild only in compliance with the code.
Well, not only that, but again, if I'm reading this correctly, the authority of the director has the authority to determine if the application satisfies the purpose, the director can determine that certain standards don't apply. So I think in that case, tell me if I'm wrong on this, David, but if the fire truck came and blew up the foundation, couldn't the director say, hey, you can put in the new foundation because of the circumstances, and it's still, it doesn't create, we're not creating an economic hardship, and it still satisfies the purposes of this chapter. So, I mean, I'm not even sure where it would go from there to variance.
Well, there's
No, I understand.
different sections.
He was taking us in a different path, but I get it.
There are different sections of the code, right? There's one section of the code that says what structures are allowed in this steep slope. He can't vary that, right? So that section is set in terms of what structures. Only who can vary that will be you. If someone requests a variation, they want to allow a structure, their principal home, to be in the steep slope zone. Only you can grant that variation. He can't grant an exception. There may be how a standard is applied for when someone wants to construct a deck, the stairs going down, but the code identifies what structures are allowed in the steep slope.
So what would happen in the case of the egress out to the beach that was mentioned, I think Mr. Hara? He goes down to his basement, he goes out to the beach, his foundation's crumbling. Who would approve that he can fix that foundation?
If he has to replace the foundation, he will have to come to you to ask for a variation to be able to replace that foundation based upon how the code is currently drafted.
But to repair?
To repair using the existing foundation.
Correct.
The structure, he can repair anything, he can maintain anything, but if he has to replace the foundation.
Right. Who would determine that he could repair that foundation?
An engineer.
Engineers. Jim would have to determine that their engineers are demonstrating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I thought, okay.
But if I also have a boathouse and the waves smack it, knock off some of the side of it, foundation's fine, I can just all day long repair it, don't even have to get approval. I mean, I can go repair that on the same foundation, fix it up, change it, whatever I want to do in the same foundation.
Yep.
Yeah. For as long as time shall live, yeah.
Or as long as the foundation exists.
Yep.
Can we riff on this a little bit? Let's not talk about structures for a moment. Excuse me. Let's talk about like bluffs or just land areas that might get damaged by waves or by. Is there requirements for homeowners to seek approval or variances for, let's say, rebuilding a bluff that might be damaged, or if they're going to, through the course of construction, just from an engineering standpoint, realize it's unstable and they want to take it apart and put it back stronger than it was? Do they have to get a variance for that, or is that just the director engineering approval?
It would depend on the severity of what they're trying to restore. If it was within the confines of the ordinance, I could review that, and if I felt it appropriate, as long as they provided the appropriate technical information, we could approve that without seeking a variance.
So just to like go down
I think the answer to your question is the section, Bob, that you referred to is 1782-050. That's development standards. And that does contain the provision that allows the director to adjust standards. The standards that he's authorized to adjust are those in that section, not the entire ordinance. And those, the standards in that section, I think, are the ones that, the types of things you're talking about. Safety and control of steep slopes, construction techniques, hydrological controls, vegetation and revegetation, filling, grading, and earth moving. All of those standards, the director does have the ability to vary if, as this code said, he deems it necessary in economic hardship, et cetera. But not, as David said, the other provisions of the code, you know, the structures, those, you know, would fall under a variation. I don't think you want the director to allow, you know, to be able to vary anything in this ordinance.
If we just go down the path, and let's just run through a smaller version of another 205. And forget about the structures, you know, not talk about, but let's just talk about, like, hey, the bluff, the whole land is unstable, it's in bad shape, it's not original, there's nothing native here. We want to scoop this whole thing out. I think these are the terminologies we used when we started this process, and we'll put it back stronger and better than what it was before. And again, not having to do with structures and setbacks, but just about the ecological aspects of the site.
That would be here.
Do they need to come through and get a variance, or can they work with the director and get that approval?
If all they're asking for is doing some slope work on the bluff?
No, now we're to Kirk's new idea, which is if they want to walk out basement.
No, nothing about structures, just about the bluff itself. There's this.
Why would they dig it all out?
What's that?
You said they would dig it out and replace it.
They want to put it back better. I mean, inherently, I think, and I'm not an engineer, but the way I look at the proposed ordinance following Glenn Coe's lead is that, you know, with looking at the angles and the slopes and the setback and the tableland, all these, right, that has to do with keeping that zone undisturbed, so to speak, so it doesn't, let's say, you know, become in worse shape, or you don't build something there and it's going to, you know, sink down or slump down into the lake. But if somebody goes through and does the engineering and says, hey, yeah, I know I can't build anything in this area, but this is really an unstable thing, or it's not original, and we want to scrape it out, but we'll put something back, and it's going to be better than what it was before. Do they need to get a variance to do that?
It would depend. I wouldn't make a decision in a vacuum. I would at least work with, see what information, what technical information is provided, why is it needed, what's the approach for stabilizing it. I think you're talking about stabilizing it, re-landscaping, restabilizing it to meet code requirements, make sure it's natural, and I would work in coordination with Caleb, engineer, to make sure that restoration. Oh, sorry. Oh, my battery's going dead. Sorry. So we wouldn't do that in a vacuum. So I would work with the coastal engineer on it. We would see what information, technical information they provided. If I thought that the information they provided was enough to justify why they were not regrading, but restabilizing or reestablishing the bluff, and I didn't think it needed a variance, I could approve that.
Others? We were kind of looking at two concepts. Was there anything brought up tonight that you'd like to ask of the people who presented? And are there any other scenarios we should be thinking about that we are not sure are covered in what we have already?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I mean, the one that Kurt and I talked about, which was about Whitebridge, that there is an outlet for somebody to come for variance, that they're saying, hey, I got a hardship here. There's multiple opportunities to do that. So
Section 17.82.100.
So there is an outlet. What I always wanted to make sure is the homeowner has have an outlet, a reasonable outlet, make their case and get it done. So there is. Okay.
Can I take it in a slightly different direction?
Sure.
Topic? All right. And so when staff was polling informally or calling each one of the trustees just to get various things we've incorporated in this latest version, there's a question about the size of the boathouse. One comment I raised when the comment was raised about the 50-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark or the tow. My personal reaction, I just wanted, for the record, it's a little confusing to me, and maybe this is something we could clarify right now, is if you're in a situation where, let's say, the ordinary high water mark is pretty close to the toe of the bluff, which means you have a 50-foot setback before you could build a boathouse. Is that correct?
Right.
Well, okay, so let's just think through a scenario where you've got like a 5-foot beach. You know, there's a water line 5 feet away, there's a toe, and then you have to go back 50 feet to be able to build an accessory structure, which is the boathouse, or is that not correct?
The toe of the bluff.
The toe is where the accessory structure of the boathouse could be constructed.
That's where the steep slope ordinance begins. So that triggers it.
So the front the front setback is either 50 feet from the ordinary high water mark or the toe of the.
Or the toe, so they can build up to the toe.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Up to the toe.
If that's the greatest distance from the ordinary high water mark.
That's the issue, though. So let's walk through that then. So if we're allowing whatever the size of the boathouse is, someone can build a boathouse, and the ordinary high water mark is 5 feet off of the toe of the bluff.
5 feet lakeward of the toe?
Lakeward,
Okay.
correct. That means you have to go 45 feet from the toe before you could build a boathouse. Is that correct?
No, because we permit boathouses in the steep slope. So that's,
So the boathouses there's no setback for a
that's in the
boathouse.
ordinance now.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify that there wasn't a setback requirement like you have in a front yard or a side yard setback for accessory structures. We don't have that here.
Correct.
Got it, thank you.
Others?
Peter, can I ask a question? In Mr. Frank's letter, there's a great emphasis on the word natural, natural resources, natural bluffs. I, for one, was never under the understanding that the bluffs dated back to, the 1500s or whatever. I mean, I knew they were all, I've seen the bluffs, I've been to homes on the bluffs, I've seen the work that's been done. So personally, I knew they weren't, quote, natural, as Mr. Frank seems to be saying. Is that language that we should be just clarifying? That natural does not mean, at least in maybe some of our minds, that they've been undisturbed forevermore. Natural and/or current conditions or something like that?
We are not wed by that language. So if the council's more comfortable with tweaking it to say what you just said,
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that the way we're saying it implies or states that we're saying that those bluffs have never been disturbed? By using the word natural?
Well, that's the way some people have interpreted it. There's another way to interpret it as well. So that's what I'm saying. If there's a desire to clarify it so there's no ambiguity, then I have no objection to that.
Personally, I would clarify that.
Yeah.
Personally.
I mean, I picture the word natural, like we've used the term natural resources. Our natural resources are our trees, the lakefront, the bluffs. It doesn't mean original.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's, I guess that's a colloquial word to use the term natural, but it's sort of to me, it's an accepted reference to those things we have in our community. Again, the trees, streams, lake, beaches. But if there's some legal reason we need to refine that, I'm okay with that.
I think the main legal reason we have is litigation avoidance, so.
But I mean, I don't think the word natural implied million-year-old specific grains of sand are still, or soil is in the bluff.
Right.
I think, do we all think it would make sense to firm that up a little bit or come up with some language that might be less?
I defer to Peter. I mean, that's.
Can do that. Okay.
Yep.
Good enough.
And again, I may be a lone wolf on this, and I like the flexibility that's built in here that we've talked about, that the director has, the variations, blah, blah, blah. But I do think there should be something in the permit approval process that memorializes if there are exceptions made.
Yeah,
Chapter.
that makes sense.
You got that? Yeah, and so I don't know if it's a separate, that it encompasses if the arborist does it, the director does it, whatever, that there's some, the file's gonna need it. So if that's, that would be good. Is that something that would be added to the ordinance?
Yeah,
Peter?
we can add it.
Okay. Yep. Good. Thank you.
Other thoughts?
Can I walk down another what if?
This is your last rabbit hole.
I'm trying to role play exactly like all these scenarios that could happen, and maybe some of this might be informative for the impacted
It's
homes.
almost 10.
Okay, be quick. So let's walk through a situation where you have one property sandwiched between two properties that have been fully improved the way the ordinance currently allows, where their homes are pushed right up to the bluff or whatever they have, structures. It's all conforming as of like a year ago, and then you have a house that's set back. And if, let's say their property is untouched in the recent past, and if they're gonna conform to the new regulations, their house is gonna be set back, dozens of feet, 50, 100 feet, compared to the neighboring properties that have, rebuilt the bluff, or it's not even a bluff anymore, it's terraces, et cetera. And if I recall, just like we have in our front yard setbacks, if you have porches that encroach in the front yard setback, you can actually do like an analysis and look at what's the average of the two neighboring properties, about all the houses on the block that are encroaching in that front yard setback. Could someone make a claim or a variation request, something similar, where, well, my neighbors are all pushed up against the lake and they've done all these improvements, and I want to request a variance to encroach on that setback area because it hurts my view corridors or whatnot. I mean, would we entertain a situation like that? Because I see that playing out with some of these remaining properties that haven't been improved in the last 50 to 70 years.
It would require a variation. And you would have to determine if it's appropriate in that situation for someone to construct on the steep slope of the bluff because their neighbors have done that. I don't, if that would be something you would grant, I don't know, but.
Or if is there anything in our ordinance, proposed ordinances about view corridors or in terms of the impacts to the neighboring properties or anything of that sort?
No. No, there's currently not.
Should there be?
I'm just thinking through if I were a homeowner, and I'm not thinking through the ones that have been improved, but the ones that are going to be improved sometime in the future. What are the scenarios that they're going to be faced with, and what are the obstacles that they would have to go through, not necessarily to disregard the effort that's being put into this new ordinance, but something to better accommodate their property. So they're not, if everyone else is, 50 feet back from, or whatever the setback is, and the new regulation is going to put this property, 70 feet back from there, and it's only a 100-foot wide property. It's almost like an alley between, with your neighbor's house overlooking your lawn out to the lake. I mean,
what you're saying, Kirk, I believe, and David, you would know this zoning code, that if you go up and down a block, there's some measurement about the average setback of the homes on that block. And then a new home could be set back at that average level or whatever that is, right? I think that's kind of what you're saying. The street is a lakefront in this case.
it is a front yard.
It's the front yard, and the question is, if that, I mean, I don't even know if what you're suggesting is actually, is it just hypothetical?
It's hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical, I don't know if it exists. But the question, I think, as David says, if it was gonna be built right into the slope, definitely that would require a variance, and the council could determine. The council 10 years from now could determine that.
That makes sense.
I got one more thing, and I'll be done.
Rabbit holes. Go ahead.
So the analysis on the boathouse size, I think it was 860 feet was recommended, and that was based on largely what was the average, close to the average and the median of what's existing. And I know and I appreciate all the detailed research staff had done on this, but, you know, we probably have a combination of bathhouses, boathouses, you know, non-functional boathouses, et cetera, right? Those are just accessory structures that are along the lake. But when we did the analysis, just the general discussion was around, okay, well, most folks would potentially want the option of having room for two boats, or, you know, a boat and whatever accessories, watercraft, you know, water toys, that sort of thing. I think, you know, the analysis was saying, well, that would mean, just based on simple math, could be like a 1,200 square foot structure. I think in reality, it doesn't necessarily have to be that big, but 860 wouldn't necessarily accommodate two full-size boats that those trailers could. If I'm going to put in one plug, and it's because I'm a boat person, it would be great if we could maybe do a little wiggle room on that, maybe move it up to, if you really think about the dimensions, 12 foot wide, 2.5 on each side, 35 feet deep, that gets you around 1,000 square feet. And I'm just asking for an olive branch with some of the residents to be able to give them some flexibility to have more constructed or built space that affords them more access or recreation at the lake level. Just a thought.
Does that get traction with anybody?
I'm not sure that that's something that's been a big issue, because I think most people in reality don't have two of the same boats. I think they have a boat and then wave runners or other things. So the idea was to have a bigger space than one boat. This is what Glencoe told us when they have just for one. They said, we wish we had done a little bit bigger so that people could have other stuff in there and move around, like when you have one car in the garage and a bunch of bikes instead of two cars in the garage. I don't feel, we're at the average with the 867, and I don't feel that that's been a topic that has been what's been upsetting people. So, I mean.
And I think there was language added about the
height is
deck?
high, and the deck, because Kirk wants his dream deck, he's building his dream house here. But that it's fine if the railing is higher than the 15 feet, so that people who want a deck there can have a deck there.
Just throwing it out.
Didn't sound like it ran up very far, did it? That's okay. That's why we have these conversations, for sure.
Right.
Hal, I got to ask you a question, if it's okay with you guys? Because I'm, okay. In your item 4, or your letter, item 4A. I'm just trying to track it, and I just.
Mr. President, that is an excellent question.
Oh, thanks.
That was a mistake. I was misreading what it was saying.
Okay.
Okay. So I tried to correct that with what I said tonight by identifying that basically what is in 030 should also be allowed in 040.
Okay.
Okay?
So.
But can I say one thing, as long as you gave me the floor for 2 seconds? I just want to say this. I want to, because your discussion is interesting to me, very interesting, because it shows exactly why we think this needs a little more time. It's not ready for prime time. I want to thank my friend David over here, because he hit the nail on the head. I know that a bunch of you think that you've put in the ordinance provisions that grandfather and protect the improvements of the owners who've already built things, okay? But you heard him say, because the language in the ordinance, one of his slides, and it's, I tabbed it here. It says in 040, you can rebuild on the exact foundation. And you heard him say, David say, if the foundation goes away, which is what people were saying tonight, you cannot rebuild. And he said, the goal of the ordinance is to return these areas where there are non-conforming structures into undeveloped land. I won't even say natural. That's the goal, right? That's what you said. The goal is to turn it into undeveloped land. So you think you're protecting, I think your intent is good. I don't think the language gets you there, okay?
And the ability of a homeowner who has that peril that Mr. Hara mentioned earlier,
Right.
it doesn't give you enough comfort to know that there's a variance path for them to.
I'm glad you asked that question too, because again, go back to what I wrote. I didn't say there isn't a provision in the ordinance that deals with the right to get a variance. I said the language needs tweaking because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it doesn't say, well, like you're all saying right now, there'd be opportunity to get a variance to rebuild on a failed foundation. It says, as Peter was saying, the director has ability to interpret standards and grant variances there. I don't see where he would have the authority to grant a variance to section 040.
He doesn't.
He doesn't. That's my point.
The council does, Hal.
It doesn't say that? That's why I said, where does it say that the council could grant the variance? No,
Section 1782.
There's a variation section, and as we said, to the extent that that needs to be clarified, because the council is clearly of the view, as David and I are, that variations are affordable or afforded under this ordinance. If that wasn't clear, we will make it crystal clear.
That's all I said. It's not clear. It says you can only get a variance.
I know what it says.
Only if it restricts the ability of a property to be developed
No.
or materially I'm just saying that language isn't as broad as it should be.
It's the previous sentence, but I know what it says.
No, the previous sentence goes to general variations.
Okay, I gave you too much time, and I don't want to hear you either, so that's enough. Sit down, Hal. Thank you. There is a variance. There is a variance available to a homeowner, and look at those of you who are residents here. You see your neighbor sitting up here trying to struggle with this and figure out a good way to do this that helps us get to a better place, that what we think is a better place, because we've been made aware that if we don't take appropriate measures, that the number of 205 or 251, what's the address down there anyway? 205? 205. Okay, 205, that we can't have that in this town anymore. And it's raised a lot of people's concern overall, lakefront residents as well as others. And many of our residents have walked up to this microphone and have admitted that that's been a startling experience for anybody who lives down there, and that's not what we want to see. You know, and we have fixed that to a certain extent, but now we're making sure it's belt and suspenders in this case. But there is the ability for many opportunities to appeal either to the director or to bring it to village council, where you will be in front of a panel of your neighbors who have nothing but your best interest and the harmony of being part of this community at their center. And sometimes there has to be a level of trust between the community and the people that they've elected to represent them and do the right thing. That's why they call them trustees, right? So we have to remember that this isn't like a bunch of people sitting up here trying to scheme ways to make life miserable for our neighbors, okay? It's not that at all. It's just to make sure that some of the things that we've seen and the way the world has been changing, nobody could have thought that people would assemble $20 million worth of vacant property on the lakefront in Winnetka 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago. But now that reality exists, and individuals of that ilk find our community very desirable, and that's a good thing, and it's good for all of us. But at the same time, we have to get over this idea that we're somehow trying to limit, impose, or otherwise, beat down our neighbors. That's not the case at all. Or diminish their property values. For goodness sake, why would we do that? Now, I've been there's no hand raising. I haven't been comfortable with this process from the very beginning, and it's created, some difficult times amongst us, because I didn't think we would ever get to the point where we could find a place where this was fair, reasonable, and reflected the relationship of our community, that we're just schmucks walking down the street, eating a bagel at hometown like everybody else, okay? And there has to be a trust level that when you come to us with things like broken foundations on existing homes, that it's not going to be a conversation. It's not going to be a conversation. Or anything reasonable or that's respectful of the ordinance but tends to run afoul because of special property conditions, like the paddle court or pink, whatever that thing is. You know, we're going to sit here and think about it and talk about it, but we're going to find our way to yes. That's the whole idea of this village council. So that's in play here too. Now you can't codify that, oh, we're all neighbors here and we're going to take care of each other, but that's the way it works. And thank goodness we live in a town of 11,000 people where we can act that way. That we don't have to be like Evanston where people are showing up and out in I mean, we all know each other. And there isn't one place in this town where I couldn't walk to any resident's home, which shows how closely knit together we are. So I understand the concerns about the property values. I still harbor concerns about property values, and I always will. I will always harbor concerns about property rights, and I even do with this, but you know, I've been able to get over it because I know at the end of the day, it's been reconciled by the fact that I know that the people up here are good people and who recognize their position, their dual position of being a citizen, a neighbor, well, it's actually two, and an elected official. So, is there anything else in that readings that you guys might want to consider? Or that maybe Peter can think about in the next few weeks and propose changes if he finds something in there that he thinks makes the ordinance better? That makes sense?
Well, I do think that, I mean, there's...
You got a hit list, Bob?
What's that?
Do you have a hit list?
Well, I was just looking again at the appeal process. And I think that's a central part of this ordinance to me. I mean, when I first read it, I thought, wow, you know, there's really too much appeal process. I mean, there's too much flexibility here, but there is a lot of it available. And again, I think so Peter, you know, Mr. Frank's point, if we need to clarify the appeals, you know, the variation process to the village council, fine, let's clarify it. Let's make that a strong section here that sort of recognizes that these properties all are unique and that it's likely that the village council and the director will be presented with permit applications that might drift off from the letter of the code here. And so just let's make that strong and make it work. And I think if we do that, then we're getting to where we should be. We have an intent here. We have an ordinance that is trying to accomplish certain things, but it recognizes the important property rights of the folks out in the audience here. So let's just make that as strong as it can be. And I'd be, aside from some of Kirk's points, personally, I'd be ready to go on this.
Any other thoughts or comments? Last bite at the apple, guys. Not hearing any? Okay. Now if I can find my script. Okay. If we introduce this tonight, because I do think it's worthwhile for all of us to go through the materials that have been submitted this evening and give them serious consideration. I'd be nervous to just say 23rd, because it is only 2 weeks. So maybe this is one case where we could make an introduction tonight and we could push the second reading off to the first meeting in February. It'll give everybody a little time. It'll give Peter a little bit more time. It'll give us time to interact individually, one-on-one, and see if there's some items that merit more discussion. But at least it'll be on the table in its basic form, and then we can kind of work on it from there. Does that make sense? Okay, may I have a motion to introduce and introduce ordinance number MC1 2024?
So moved.
Second. Bob can have.
Okay, that's a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay.
Moving forward, item 9, old business, we have none. Item 10, new business, we have none. Item 11 is appointments. The first appointment that I'm requesting is that we appoint Cyrus Sabawala to a full term on the Plan Commission, and his term will expire on January 9th, 2027. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Appoint Catherine Meister to a full term on the Zoning Board of Appeals. Her term will expire on January 9th, 2029. May I have a motion to approve Catherine?
So moved.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. And to appoint Colin Kennedy to a full term on the DRB and the Design Review Board. His term will expire on January 9th, 2029. May I have a motion to approve Colin?
So moved.
Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. I'll have one more at the next meeting, and that should at least get our commissions filled up to a point where they can function and not be so worried about quorums. All right. Item 12, closed session. There is none. And item 13 is adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Voice vote. All those in favor? Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.